Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel, YLS it Invincible. Chapter 41. Okay, if nothing happens now, you can. Thinking that the matter was done, Tony pointed to the door. The subtext of seeing off guests was self-evident. Forehead. Robert was embarrassed at this point. He recalled that his home was full of big holes, and he might have to worry about when it would collapse when he went to sleep at night. If a gust of wind blows, the good result is to be awakened by the cold, but the bad result is. Tony is like this, because of some special reasons ahem. Tony didn't react at first, and it wasn't until a few seconds later that he came to his senses. Tony, you mean you want to live with me for a while, right? When Robert heard Tony's words, he originally wanted to tell him that he actually wanted his help in finding a good and cheap house so that he could buy it and live in it. But now Tony actually offered to let Robert live here. He originally wanted to establish a good relationship with him so that he could use his protagonist's halo to contact the other, Infinity Stones. If you can, Tony. Of course, no problem. Robert wanted to make friends with Tony, and why didn't Tony want to make friends with him? Tony had seen his ability with his own eyes just now, and he knew that even if he made the steel suit, he would not be able to fight Robert. With such a powerful person, any normal person with an above-average IQ would be friends with him. Jarvis, call Pepper for me. Jarvis. Yes, sir. D-ling-ling, dial tone. A few seconds later, Pepper's voice sounded. Hello, Pepper, is your supper ready? If it's ready, bring it down. If it's not ready yet, put it away first. Pepper, I'll be ready now. Just wait a moment. Beep. She seemed to be doing something urgent, so she hung up the phone after speaking in a hurry. Well, I think she should be busy now. How about I ask Jarvis to take you to the room to take a look? Robert, it doesn't matter to me. Tony, okay, Jarvis takes our guests to the guest bedroom. Jarvis, please follow me, Mr. Robert. The voice of artificial intelligence Jarvis sounded, and then an arrow guidance sign shone in front. How about it? After Robert looked at the arrow composed of holographic projection on the ground, Tony asked rather show off. Ordinary people might be really frightened, but Robert already knew Tony's ability and was not surprised by this. Not bad. After giving Tony a perfunctory answer, Robert followed the instructions and went to the guest bedroom, leaving Tony feeling dejected as he pretended to have failed. It can be said that Tony is indeed a famous rich man. The villa he lives in is much larger than the one Robert owned in New York in terms of area alone. Following the guidance, he was taken to a large guest bedroom. Robert took a look at the luxurious and technological decoration in the room, and couldn't help but lie down on the big bed in the center of the room. As soon as he lay down, Robert felt like he was sinking into a cloud. The odor-free bedding on the bed suddenly made him sleepy. It has been detected that your willingness to sleep has reached 90%, and the lighting has been automatically turned off for you. I wish you a sweet dream. Jarvis's voice rang in his ears, and when Robert was about to fall asleep at last, he sighed, it's good to have money. In the underground laboratory of the villa, Tony finished replacing the small reactor on his chest and started what he had originally planned to do after sending Robert away. No, this has to be removed. It's too bloated. There was a drawing composed of holographic images in front of him, and Tony was modifying the armor displayed on the drawing, trying to perfect it to the best. Mr. Tony Stark, Mr. Robert has gone to bed. At this time, Jarvis suddenly spoke out from the holographic image, and Tony was modifying the drawings while talking. Give Robert the highest authority. I have just checked that my father did have such a friend who he had a brief relationship with. He actually wrote about him in his diary. You know, I didn't even appear in a few pages in it. At first, Tony was still talking about business, but then it gradually evolved into his personal soliloquy, and Jarvis just listened to his first sentence and shut down directly, requiring the next call to activate. Bang, bang. Tony, Pepper, who was dragging the dinner plate, had just prepared the supper and wanted to give it to Robert and Tony to try, but what she didn't expect was that her highest authority could not enter the laboratory now. Here it comes. Pepper's position did not allow her to see clearly what Tony was doing, but this did not prevent her from complaining as soon as she came in. Is there something important that you need to hide from me? One of the things I prepared for you just now is already asleep, and the other won't even let me in. Are you alienating me, Tony? Pepper's continuous questioning made Tony feel a little confused. Even Tony himself didn't believe that he could keep her by his side because he liked the new and disliked the old. He said that he had no feelings. Okay, it's true that I didn't alienate you. I was doing business just now. As he spoke, Tony hugged Pepper. Regardless of his doubts and Pepper's confusion, he just wanted to hold her for a while. After an unknown amount of time, Pepper and Tony's eyes met, and the two began to get closer involuntarily. Call. Tony let out a breath of disappointment and blew it on Pepper's face, which made the other party come to his senses instantly and break away from his arms. I think I should go to bed. Good night, Tony. Pepper arranged her clothes in a panic and hurriedly left Tony's sight. Oh well, Tony, who secretly hated himself for not living up to expectations, wanted to slap himself in the face. After watching the cooked duck fly away, he had no choice but to accept the reality and began to devote himself to the research on simplifying the steel suit. He was so busy until late at night that he couldn't hold on to sleep. Before going to sleep, he suddenly remembered something. Jarvis, please remember to wake me up when Robert wakes up tomorrow. There are some details of the plan that I forgot to tell him. Okay, boss, I wish you a sweet dream. Snoring. Tony quickly fell asleep with his tired body, but what made him unable to adapt was Robert's habit of going to bed early and getting up early. Good morning, Mr. Robert. It is now 7 o'clock in the morning. The indoor temperature is 23 degrees Celsius and the outdoor temperature is 17 degrees. The sun has not risen yet. If you are interested, you can go to the window to enjoy the sunrise on the East Coast. Robert just sat up from the bed and was about to fumble to turn on the light. This is a normal step for normal humans to get up in the dark, but the name here is Tony's house. As soon as he made a move, the lights in the room were turned on from weak to bright. It was a very soft feeling, without the abrupt and dazzling feeling caused by suddenly turning on the lights in the dark. Although it is said to be a guest bedroom, it is not only a bed, but also equipped with an exclusive bathroom and shower room. Robert, who went to bed early last night, just wanted to take a shower. 10 minutes later, when he finished taking a shower and opened the shower door, he saw the curtain slowly opening, and a red shadow rising slowly outside the completely transparent glass wall. To be honest, I can't understand why someone would get up at this time. Please brother, the healthy schedule stipulated by the United Nations is to go to bed at 2200 at night and start at 9 o'clock in the morning. Your schedule is obviously not in line with international regulations. While Robert was happily admiring the scenery outside the transparent floating window, Tony's voice sounded a little bit excited in the room, and he was startled at first. I don't like being watched. Robert immediately expressed his protest. I can have whatever I want in my home. However, in the face of Tony's undoubted reasons, Robert's words seemed a little weak. Okay, what do you want to say? Robert was forced to accept the possibility of being monitored at any time unless he moved out. Although he now has a huge sum of 160 million United States dollars in his hand, Robert has not yet thought about using the money to buy a house. It's like this. I asked you to be responsible for the investigation yesterday. Now I have officially hired you as Stark, company's security consultant. And provided you with a mobile account. You move more conveniently. Lou. Tony fell asleep again as soon as he finished speaking intermittently. Robert listened to his snoring and silently closed the call with him. What did Jarvis Tony mean by that action account? Is there any money in it? Jarvis. Inquiry, identity confirmation, confirmation successful. After a few seconds of inquiry, Jarvis confirmed Robert's identity and successfully answered his question. As the name suggests, the action account is an account specially set up for this operation. It contains $50 million. It should be noted that these funds belong to Mr. Stark and can only be used for cut. After remembering the card number and password, Robert directly opened the space door and left here, leaving Jarvis's artificial intelligence to worry about the ownership of the money in vain. In the bathroom on the second floor of the sophomore class at Midtown High School, a blue light hole appeared out of thin air, and Robert walked out of it. Although the location is a bit strange, it's not to mention very convenient, at least it's much faster than driving. Looking at the toilet without a urinal, Robert should be glad that he went to bed early and got up early, otherwise he would have been regarded as a pervert if a female classmate went to the toilet later in the evening. During the first class in the morning, Robert noticed that Peter sitting next to him was not in good condition. Recalling the scene where he was bitten by a spider yesterday, he guessed that the super spider gene was at work. "Peter, I think you should take a leave of absence and go home and rest for a while." With his eyes dazed, Peter Parker was stunned for a long time before he could recognize the person in front of him, Robert. "I'm fine, don't worry, Robert." Forced a smile, Peter pretended to be relaxed and said, "You don't look like a normal person now. If you don't want to go back, you can consider lying down on the table and resting for a while." "Good idea," Robert suggested, letting Peter's eyes light up, and then he lay down on the table and fell asleep. Ring, ring, ring. The ringing of the bell for the end of get out of class did not wake Peter up. At this time, another friend of his, Harry, came over and expressed concern. "Is Peter okay? You know he never slept during class time before." "Who knows, maybe I didn't sleep well last night." Robert didn't answer Harry truthfully. Could it be that he wanted to tell Harry that it was the super spider's genes that were changing Peter? "That's unrealistic, and if you do that, you'll easily be regarded as crazy." "Okay, let him rest for a while. If it still doesn't work in the afternoon, we may have to take him to the school doctor to see." Harry's face was full of worry, and it could be seen that at this time, he still regarded Peter as a friend sincerely, but in the end, the two turned against each other because of a woman and a man, which was sad. Thinking of women, Robert subconsciously shifted his gaze to Belinda in the front row and found that she was also looking at him quietly at this time. Robert found that whenever he looked at her, her eyes were always on him. "Who says money can't buy love?" Robert thought to himself while smiling at Belinda, but his actions made her turn away shyly. A breeze blew through the window, picking up a strand of the girl's hair. The sun also took advantage of this moment to shine on the girl's face, which gave her an indescribable sense of beauty. "Belinda, I love you." Outside the class, a loud roar suddenly sounded, which unintentionally ruined the scenery Robert was admiring, and even ruined his good mood. "Who is that person?" Robert asked Harry next to him. After all, he had just arrived and didn't know many people or didn't know them at all. "Harry. Jim Byron heard that his family works in the education management department, but the position should not be high, otherwise he would have gone to a private school." Robert had already walked up before Harry finished speaking. "Belinda, I have a bouquet of flowers here to represent my deep love for you." "Well, accept him. Quick, Belinda, don't hesitate." Some people had already begun to boo, and the atmosphere had reached this point. Jim himself was about to kneel down on one knee when Robert suddenly broke into the crowd and blocked Belinda. "Jim, who are you? Get away from me." Jim was disgusted by the stranger's ignorance when he suddenly broke in. "What's wrong with you? Didn't you see that the other person was confessing your love? Don't block the way." "That's right, don't make yourself uncomfortable. If you leave now, we can let you go." "What are you still looking at? Get out." Jim's friends saw that his carefully prepared confession was about to be interrupted by a strange boy, and they jumped out to threaten Robert before he could speak. "Who is this kid? New here, haven't you heard of the reputation of the Jidden gang? It's a strange face, I don't think I know it. Hey, there's something good to watch today." A group of students from foreign classes also ran over to watch the fun. Jim's originally gloomy expression improved a lot as he listened to the constant compliments from the side. He stared blankly at Robert as if to say, "You know how powerful it is, why don't you get out of here? Your thoughts?" Robert didn't care what happened to Jim, but turned to Belinda and asked. I don't want your flowers, sorry." Belinda gave an answer that satisfied Robert. Now he can consider not having her pay back the money. Wow. Although Belinda's answer satisfied Robert, it was obvious that the crowd at the scene couldn't believe it. A closer look revealed that the surprised people were all students from other floors or even the building next door. Because the management of Midtown School deliberately downplayed Robert's act of asserting his authority against Fresh at that time, his deeds did not spread throughout the school. The effect of Robert's power was only spread between the same floors at most. However, he was personally questioned by the principal of Zongcheng, and the matter was suppressed. That's why most of the people making noises were strangers, while people in Robert's class and on the same floor were just watching the fun, but not many jeered. Belinda, why? Jim was holding flowers in his hands. He glanced around and found that some of his classmates who were just optimistic about him now had snickering expressions. This is unbearable for the face-conscious young man, especially Jim, who considers himself a prominent figure in Midtown High School. Belinda looked at Robert and didn't know how to deal with this situation. She had also encountered people who wrote love letters and even confessed like Jim before, but after she refused, those people would give up like a gentleman. Where has Jim ever been like this? Get to the bottom of it. I see, it was this guy who threatened you, right? Seeing more and more mocking expressions from the people around him, Jim began to blame Robert, who was standing in front of him. He pointed at Robert with a red face and said that he was threatening Belinda. What are you doing? But Robert, who was pointed at by him, suddenly took a step forward, which startled Jim. But when he turned around and saw some of his strong friends, he felt confident and asked Robert, "Stop making trouble and go back. If this continues, everyone will not look good." However, Robert did not mean to hit him, but advised him in his ear. It's not that he treats him differently. When Flesh teases Peter, he cripples his hand without saying a word, but now when he meets Jim, he tries to persuade him. The fundamental reason lies in Flesh. In his previous life, Robert was an ordinary person and fell in love with Marvel's Spider-Man when he watched it. However, he didn't even know Jim, who liked Belinda, let alone hate him. So Robert didn't mind giving him a step to step down safely. Humph, it's you who will be ugly for a while. However, Robert's kindness was not readily accepted, and Jim thought he was provoking. Brothers, this guy wants to embarrass me. After he finished speaking bitterly to Robert, Jim began to call his friends. After he called out, several people walked out of the crowd and looked at Robert with unkind expressions. Hey, there's a good show to watch. This kid is so crazy, now he is unlucky. Wait, someone is coming over there. The security team is here, it's a spoiler. Why did they come so quickly this time? Jim and others had just surrounded Robert. Belinda was outside trying to persuade Jim, but he was indifferent and became even more angry. When he was about to teach Robert a lesson, he suddenly heard from beside him that the security team was coming. Stop, stop, the security captain shouted from a distance to the crowd surrounding Robert. Even though he was panting from exhaustion, he still rushed over as quickly as possible. From the gap left by the crowd watching, Jim saw that the security team was really coming. Even though he was arrogant, he didn't dare to do anything in front of the security team, because he would be punished. Although the family could solve it, Jim's father would not make it easy for him. You're lucky this time, but don't just let it go. He had no choice but to give up this opportunity to teach Robert a lesson, but Jim still did not forget to threaten him. Phew, thank God. As soon as Jim finished speaking, the security captain ran over with 10 team members. He breathed a sigh of relief after seeing Robert in the crowd safe and sound. When Jim saw the security guards coming, he also gave his companions a look to tell them to disperse first, but at this time Robert suddenly moved. Snapped. A loud slap to Jim's face, in front of everyone. What I hate the most is threats. After slapping Jim, Robert shook his hand as if he had done something trivial. Jim, well, I read that right, Jim was beaten. Yes, you read that right. What happened? I was distracted and didn't see it. The crowd became active again. Jim covered his face and glared at Robert. Several of his friends wanted to stand up for him, but they were afraid to do anything because the security team was nearby. Security, you have seen it, this kid hurts his classmates at will, arrest him quickly and punish him. Finally, a smarter one among Jim's friends said to the security team who arrived, since they can't take action now, it would be the same to borrow someone else's hand. What? I didn't see it. However, what was shocking was that after scanning the situation, the security captain began to pretend to be blind, as if he had really seen nothing just now. How could you not see it? These people surrounded me just now and wanted to beat me. They were so arrogant. Why didn't you arrest them quickly? Jim covered his sore face. He was already angry enough when he heard the security guard's obvious partiality, but now Robert slapped him again, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Jim, what are you doing? As soon as he gathered the momentum to question Robert, Jim found that he had been pushed to the ground. The security guards really listened to Robert's words and pushed him and his companions down. Jim, who was about to explode with anger, began to resist, but was completely conquered after several more security guards arrived. Mr. Robert, are you satisfied? A few minutes later, the security captain pointed to Jim and others who were tied up and asked Robert. Okay, let's take them to the principal's office and check them out. They were said to be a gang before. Yes. After the security captain saluted Robert in a nondescript manner, he took Jim, who looked unconvinced, to the principal's office. HMPH, you actually dare to favor him like this, I'm going to sue you. Jim was still chattering on the road, but the security captain, who was the main person responsible for tying them up, picked his ears and seemed a little unconcerned. You're lucky, kid, don't be ungrateful. Did you find out who that guy is before you mess with him? Seeing that Jim was still ready to scream, the security captain was ready to give this ignorant boy a few words in order to keep him quiet on the road ahead. Who is he? Sure enough, when he heard this topic, Jim immediately stopped shouting. You know about Flesh and their class, right? I know. I heard that he went to jail for some unknown reason. What does this have to do with that kid just now? What does it have to do with it? Humph. Just now you offended that Robert. Flesh did it before and he went to jail a few days later. What do you think it has to do with it? Jim didn't believe what the security captain said at first. It wasn't that he doubted that there were people with such energy in the world, but that he doubted how such a person could appear in a public high school. You must know that public schools in the United States are not as good as private schools. Those powerful people like to send their children to private schools. That is to say, only in the top classes of Robert's public university would there be a few children from wealthy families. Really powerful people would never come here. American public schools are usually where ordinary children go to school, which is why Jim can walk sideways here. Are you telling the truth? Jim didn't believe it at first, but when he thought that the security guards still had a fearless attitude even though they had wronged him, he couldn't help but be shaken. Believe it or not, seeing that he had stopped yelling, the security captain didn't bother to talk to him anymore. When he arrived at the principal's office, he couldn't help but disbelieve him. Belinda will be my girlfriend from now on. I hope that the situation just now will not happen again. In Robert's class, he hugged Belinda in his arms in public as he spoke, but she didn't resist but was so shy that she buried her face in it. Okay, let's all disperse. After telling what she wanted to say, she saw that Belinda was really shy, so she didn't say anything more and asked the spectators to disperse. After what he had done to Jim just now, there was no one present who spoke against Robert. Except for a few people who wished him well, no one even said a word of complaint, at least not in person. Holding the girl in my arms and smelling the fragrance on her body, even if I have tasted it once, how can I do that? Do you still live in Queens? Robert spoke in Belinda's ear, and a stream of hot air penetrated into her ear. It felt itchy and there was also an inexplicable feeling. Well, not now, but I should go back to my mother's home after she is discharged from the hospital. Belinda, who was held in Robert's arms, said softly. Forget it, the place is messy. I have a house in the city. You can go back and clean it up in the next few days. Then I will take you to move there. Now that the identity of the other party has been announced, Robert feels that he should take the responsibility, and he has already thought about the money and does not need to pay it himself. My home is still livable, and... Stop it, listen to me, go back today and prepare to move to my place tomorrow. Stopping Belinda from saying anything she still wanted to argue, Robert decided directly. Sir, may I ask which area of the house you are planning to buy? Louise, a New York real estate salesperson, couldn't believe it. This morning she received a call from a stranger before even making a sales call. The man claimed that he was in urgent need of finding a house in the city. Of course, Louis had no reason to refuse such a customer who came to him. As usual, she began to tentatively ask the other party where the bottom line of the price they could afford was. As long as the location is in the city, the most important thing is that I want a safe location. This is what I care about. Louis originally thought that Robert would name a house in a certain area. After all, customers who called directly like this usually inspected it for a long time in advance. After all, no one's money comes just by the wind. A house in New York City can easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who can care less about such a lot of money? Sir, if you want a safer place, we have several units here. The New York City Police Department is 500 meters downstairs. Lewis just mentioned it and was ready to hear Robert's next reaction. You must know that security issues have always been a concern of the American people who can't help but rob, and there is no doubt about the safety of living next to a police station. When most people are in demand, the housing prices there will naturally be driven up. The reason why Lewis asked was because he wanted to guess what Robert's expectations were based on his reaction. In other words, to put it simply, Lewis wants to know how much money Robert can get. The best one next to the city police station. How much does it cost? Lewis. Okay, let me check. Lewis, who originally wanted to speculate on how much money Robert could spend, now realized that he might have met a big customer. Quickly searching on the computer, she found the best house owned by her company next to the police station. She hurriedly told Robert, "Sir, our best house is on the 12th floor of the Demon Building on 5th Street in Uptown. It has plenty of sunshine and is far away from the hustle and bustle on the ground. It is also safe because most of the rich in New York live there. The price is only $3,500 a square meter." Listening to Robert's nonchalant tone about buying a house, Louise simply recommended him the best floor house under the company in one step. Because of the different needs, she did not recommend villas or anything like that. Robert, money doesn't matter, as long as it's safe, make an appointment and I'll come see the house. Lewis, any time is fine. Sir, could you please leave your phone number and name with me? Unexpectedly, Louise, who didn't expect the progress to be so smooth, immediately said that Robert could come to see the house at any time. Robert happened to be not a procrastinator, so he directly asked her the address of Louise's company and told her that he would be there at noon. After registering the information and getting the address of Lewis's company, Robert hung up the phone. Robert, who had cleared his browser history, conveniently retrieved the information about searching for real estate agencies in the browser. When the search history was blank, he felt comfortable. Robert, you were so handsome just now. As soon as he walked in from outside the classroom and returned to his seat to sit down, Harry said in front of him. Why is Harry so handsome? Peter, you finally woke up, but unfortunately you didn't wake up at the right time. Harry started talking about the previous events to Peter, who had just woken up. The two of them were looking at Robert as they talked. Bang! When Peter heard that Robert was surrounded by people, he immediately became angry. He hit the table to express his anger, but he didn't want the originally sturdy desk to be smashed in half in an instant. Click, dang dang, Harry, what? Oh, Peter, what are you doing? Oh my God. Peter's sudden move was very eye-catching, and almost all the eyes of the entire class were attracted. Peter also stood there awkwardly. You gotta learn to control your power, man. Robert stood up and came to Peter's side and said to Peter. While talking, he dragged the remains of the desk behind and threw it into the trash can. Then he pulled Peter to his seat and started to look for extra desks. Peter, I'm with you. Harry, I'll go too, let's forget it. The reason why he gave up was because the bell for class suddenly rang. Ring ring ring. Peter glanced at Harry, then turned around and followed Robert out. Belinda, who was sitting in the class, originally wanted to follow when she saw this, but she didn't get up because she thought that she couldn't help and might cause trouble. Peter is such a troublemaker that Robert has to help him find a table. That's right, if it weren't for Robert, he would still be bullied now. He is really bad. Shish, you have forgotten what happened to Flesh, shut up. They can't hear it anyway. Even though he said that, those who said bad things behind his back all kept their mouths shut. After all, there were lessons learned from the past. I'm sorry, Robert, I fell asleep when you were in danger and couldn't help you. On the way to find a table, Peter apologized to Robert behind him. That's not necessary. I can handle those people. The top priority now is to find a table. Robert did not struggle with this issue. He directly borrowed an extra desk from the next class. The teacher in that class obviously knew him and even wanted to come down and help personally when moving the desk. We don't need a teacher, we can do it ourselves. Robert didn't let Peter do it, because judging from his current state, he should have awakened the spider ability, but he hadn't adapted yet because the time was too short. If you ask him to help again, another card may be broken. Back in the classroom, the teacher simply asked about the situation and then nodded and asked Robert and the others to go back and sit down. There wasn't even a word of blame. Peter was a little incredulous and seemed a little uncomfortable. However, compared to the tolerance here, Jim in the principal's office was much miserable. Principal Zongcheng, in view of your bad behavior of forming cliques and bullying classmates, you will be expelled in accordance with the school rules. Jim, what? Fired? At this moment, he really believed the words of the security captain, but now it seemed that it was too late. Principal Zongcheng ignored their pleas and chose to expel them. Okay, pull them out and stand at the school gate to warn the whole school before their guardians come. Speaking to several security guards in the principal's office, he motioned for these people to be taken out, and then waited for their guardians to go through the formalities for withdrawal from school. After completing the procedures, they should go home. I have no books to read. Before being pulled out, Jim said something to himself. It was obvious that the incident was too sudden and violent for him to accept. At noon, when they were taken away by their angry parents, Robert also came to the housing agency he had contacted in the morning. Lewis, Mr. Robert, looking at young Robert, she asked with some uncertainty. Well, I am, hurry up and go see the house. I don't have much time. Ah, okay. Louise didn't react, and she began to wonder if Robert was playing tricks on her. After all, he looked like he had just grown up. Uptown, on the 12th floor of the Demon Building, Robert took a cursory look at the room. Since it was an old house, it originally had decorations, but if you could afford a house in this location, you would naturally not be stingy with the decorations. It's pretty good. That's it. I'll transfer the money to your card number. Louise was still a little nervous at first. She was worried that Robert might be playing tricks on her at such a young age. It was no wonder that she was so happy that she was so happy. Originally, the company's policy required a deposit of $5,000 to view the house, in order to screen customers, but Lewis did not think of it at the time, and was too embarrassed to mention it later. As a result, Robert gave her a big surprise. He quickly told Robert the price and the company's cashier card number, and she just sat back and waited to collect the money. Jingle bell. Lewis, how did you do it? Complete a big deal of $300,000 so quickly. I will definitely reward you well when you come back. Lewis received a call from the leader of their sales team. His words were full of joy and excitement. Lewis was in a similar state now. I really didn't expect that Mr. Robert would trust us so much. Do you have any requirements? Our company will do its best to fulfill it for you. Robert was so forthcoming, and Lewis was not shy about asking him to make some reasonable conditions. Well, if you ask me, please help me move. Lewis, is it that simple? It's that simple, Robert affirmed. After school in the afternoon, Robert took Belinda to say goodbye to Peter, who was not in good condition, and then took her to a car outside the Midtown school. Go up. He gave Belinda a look, and then got into the car first. Mr. Robert, is this lady going to move? Well, it's her. Let's go first. Her home is in Queens. Robert's original plan was to let Belinda go home and pack up first, and then he would secretly use the power of space to help her move her house while she was away. Although it felt like overkill, it was really convenient. But now, with ready manpower available, Robert is too lazy to do it himself. Behind Lewis's car were people from the moving company that cooperated with their company. As soon as these people arrived at Belinda's house, they started packing as required. Mr. Robert, the house transfer contract has been established. Please sign the owner's name and give me your identity information so that you can go back and complete the procedures. So troublesome. Do you need identity information? Robert, who was about to pick up a pen to sign, immediately felt a little embarrassed when he heard that his identity information was required, because his valid identity certificates were all in that dilapidated villa. If he was asked to get them now, would it be impossible for him to hide in the toilet and use the space door? Go back and get it. It's too much trouble. Belinda, come here, he shouted to the troubled girl who was deciding whether to keep something at home. After she came over, Robert pushed her directly in front of Lewis. Let her complete the formalities. Then he left directly, as if he didn't care about the house he bought for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, he really doesn't care that much. Louis looked at the back of the person who left gracefully, and then looked at the confused girl in front of him. To be honest, she was a little envious. Belinda didn't know why she felt a terrible feeling for her sister in front of her for a moment, but when she looked over, there was nothing there. Okay, miss, please sign your name here. This is what Mr. Robert ordered. When she heard that it was Robert who asked to sign, Belinda directly wrote her name without even looking at it, and then went to participate in her conducting work after Louis said there was no problem. Robert, who ignored the situation, quietly slipped into a quiet alley. Well, superheroes always go into alleys when they transform. Opening the space door, Robert returned directly to Tony's home in California. All right, adjust the thrust to 10%. I hope you won't be ejected this time. Robert appeared in Tony's laboratory without warning, and at this time Tony was doing experiments on his own steel suit. Hey, why do you always show up like this? Can't you just walk through the door? Tony, who was trying to adjust his flying posture, when he saw Robert appear, he was like a man whose underwear was exposed and said angrily, I'm not interested in your stuff. After just one glance, Robert lost interest in Tony's flying machine, and this caused Tony himself to become even more angry. Don't you want to see my new invention? Don't pretend you don't care that no one dislikes it. Tony is now trying to get Robert to like his invention, which makes him seem a bit capricious. I really don't like it that much, and I feel like you won't like it that much the next second. Robert was about to leave without even looking this time, but Tony didn't understand what he meant. When profound. It turned out that Robert meant that he would be pushed into the wall, and this time he hit a solid wall. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Robert was going up the stairs, and Tony, who got up from the ground, yelled at his back. Robert, are you back? It's time to start dinner. Why don't you go down and call Tony again? As soon as he walked upstairs, he saw Pepper carrying 2 steaks. Okay. Robert turned back again, and after going down the stairs, he found that Tony, who had fallen to the ground just now, had stood up again, preparing for another experiment. Identity verification. Identity confirmed. Robert has been authorized. After opening the blocked door, Robert Cheng entered. Should I say it or not, Tony, you are quite a hindrance. The identity verification thing just wasted a few seconds of his time. What does this mean to a person who is about to eat? In the way, don't be ridiculous. Without my authorization, this system will make it difficult for you to move in this house. I do not believe. In front of Tony, Robert curled his lips, which hurt the self-esteem of some arrogant people. Jarvis, I'm here, sir. Temporarily revoke all Robert's permissions and remove him from the authorized list within 1 hour. Task generated. Executing. Successfully executed. All Robert's permissions have been removed. Tony angrily made the decision to temporarily revoke Robert's authority to the artificial intelligence, and then turned to look at him with a proud face. You can't go anywhere during this hour. Tony looked at him with an arrogant look. Unless his house was demolished, Robert would really be unable to move even under normal circumstances. Even so, I can still walk on flat ground. Tony. No, you can't. I can. Tony. You can't. The voices of the two gradually increased, and finally Robert was too lazy to start a pointless argument with him. He was about to end it, but suddenly he saw Tony doing experiments in the laboratory. If he remembered correctly, Tony probably thought the place was too small and ran to the underground garage to perfect his suit. Yes, as soon as his eyes wandered, he had an idea, so instead of taking the initiative to end the dispute with Tony, he started to direct it elsewhere. Do you believe I can come and go as I please? Tony. Absolutely impossible without destroying anything. Robert. Okay, how about we make a bet? Tony. What are you betting on? I'm hooked. Hee. Robert smiled in his heart and told him about the bet he just made. You should have a lot of nice cars, right? Tony. You want a car? No problem. If you win I'll give you your choice of car, but what if you lose? If I lose, I will act like a horse and work with you for a year. But the conditions are not as simple as your car, I want them all. What? Why don't you dare? Seeing that Tony was showing signs of coming back to his senses, Robert quickly mocked him. But Tony still hesitated in the face of huge amounts of risk, because many of his cars are limited editions worldwide, and many of them are his favorites. It would be absolutely unacceptable for him to lose them all to Robert. If none of them work, I'll bet you 3 cars at most. Why are you so confident just now that you're giving in? You can admit defeat openly and I won't take one. What Tony couldn't bear the most was Robert's feeling that he seemed to look down on him, but Tony, who still had a trace of reason left, still stuck to the bottom line. You can choose up to 3 cars, no more bets. Tony has obviously come to his senses. Robert is definitely not crazy, and he will not come here to treat him as a horse. Then the thing is very clear, and he is sure that he will not win. However, remembering his previous vows, Tony, who wanted to save face, still wanted to take a gamble and win for nothing else. Moreover, he looked up and looked at his home's complete defense measures and there was no guarantee that he would lose. Okay, 3 cars will be 3. Robert was also afraid that the cooked duck would fly away, so he hurriedly agreed to the bet, otherwise Tony might not even bet on a car if he kept talking about it for a while. Tony, you lost. Pepper has prepared dinner up there and is asking you to come up and eat. Why did I lose? You obviously don't know anything, well. His next words were choked in his throat. He tried to speak but couldn't do it, because Tony had a breath stuck in the middle of his throat and couldn't come up, and the act of forcing himself to speak could only be a futile attempt. It makes him cough uncontrollably. Cough, cough. What happened? Just now Robert performed a wall-penetrating technique in front of him. After he passed through, the wall was still fine. Can a normal person do this? Tony immediately knew that he had been fooled and was so angry that he was out of breath. It wasn't until a few minutes later that he regained his composure. The first thing he said was, "Robert." A loud roar could still be faintly heard upstairs even though Tony's house was extremely soundproofed. Is that Tony's voice? Even if Pepper is an ordinary person with normal senses, he can hear it, and Robert, who has the human body limit ability, can capture these sounds. Pepper didn't hear it clearly, but Robert himself heard it clearly, but he wouldn't admit it. It seems, maybe Tony is happy because some experiment has been successful. He used a knife to cut a small piece of beef and put it into his mouth. Robert chewed it with enjoyment and said to Pepper. His expression of enjoyment was not fake. If there hadn't been a lady next to him at this time, Robert would have even wanted to swallow the beef on the plate in one bite. Dang, dang. Rushing footsteps sounded on the stairs. Robert, you cunning liar. As soon as Tony came up, he quickly found Robert's whereabouts and began to make invalid accusations against him. Liar. Tony, you swore just now that I couldn't move even an inch, and you also admitted the bet. How come you can't afford to lose in the end? Robert sat aside and looked at Tony amusedly. His words made the rich man who had never eaten turtle speechless. Tony wanted to make unreasonable sophistry but finally gave up for the sake of face. What happened between you two? Pepper looked at Tony, who was sulking, and Robert, who was smiling, and asked curiously, because it was usually Tony who made others do this. I spent half a year working for Stark Company in exchange for the opportunity to randomly choose Tony's 3 cars. Robert saw that Tony was really a little angry, so he didn't provoke him anymore, but gave in and even gave him a step. Who cares? Tony listened to Robert's words, and although he had accepted his kindness, he still muttered a little unconvinced. Pepper. Is that why? Under her influence, Tony is not a stingy person. Although the cars in his garage are all his favorite models, he won't be angry if he replaces 3 of them, right? Pepper, it's okay. I see Robert has finished his steak. He obviously doesn't have enough. Can you go make him another one? Oh, Tony obviously didn't want to get too entangled in this issue. Pepper still understood this. Although she was curious, she could only obey it. Thanks. After Pepper left, Tony whispered something, but Robert heard it even though he was small. This time he was embarrassed, and he didn't want to dwell on this issue, so he also started to change the topic. It should be, quote. By the way, Tony, the thing you asked me to do is already clear. I need you to provide me with a USB flash drive with a cracked firewall virus so that I can find evidence. Well, it's great that you still remember it. I thought you would use my money to buy a few more houses before talking to me about this matter. While eating steak across from him, Tony said sarcastically to Robert. Obviously he still had some resentment in his heart. This also tells Robert in disguise that Tony himself knows the use of his money. Normal expenses, hee hee. He smiled awkwardly. Even Robert himself felt that it was not good to spend other people's money on his own affairs, but he couldn't help it. Snort. This money was nothing to Tony, and the reason why he mentioned it was to let Robert not forget the business. Ring ring ring. Robert has been in an awkward state since Tony revealed that he used his money to buy a house. Fortunately, the ringing of the phone saved him at this time. Answer the phone. After seeing that the dialer was Burns, Robert chose to pick up the call from a distance. Oh, Tony. Just as he was walking out, Robert met someone head-on, and he couldn't help but want to come up and hug him. He's inside. The man might be holding a huge box of pizza in his hand, which blocked his vision a little. After Robert made a sound, he took the pizza box away a little. Sorry, I recognized the wrong person. Robert didn't say anything, nodded and hurried out to answer the phone. Come in and ignore that man. Obadia. Tony sat at the dining table and obviously saw the people coming. In fact, he could know how many people entered the villa if he wanted to. Oh. Who is that, Tony? I don't want to hear about your recent change of flavors. Do you know that this will make our stock price fall further? Obadia put the large pizza on the table. The reason why he said this was because Tony usually brought his new playmates to this villa. Tony, that's the 6-month contract I recently hired as a security consultant from Stark Company, so please put away your dirty thoughts now. Really, he looks like he has small arms and legs. Apart from his height, I didn't even find any traces of muscles on his body. If someone had said that about Robert before, Tony would have solemnly told that person about Robert's strength, but now. I think you may be right. Let me think about it for a few days. Maybe he is not suitable for the current job. Tony actually started to seduce Robert from behind, which shows his resentment after being cheated of 3 cars. Oh, then he is so pitiful. Obadia just said casually that he had watched Tony grow up and he knew his character very well. He could easily tell which of his words were serious and which were jokes. Robert's evaluation obviously belongs to the latter, but this is not what he cares about now. Want to eat pizza? Opening the pizza box, handing Tony a piece, he was about to get down to business. Oh, it seems like nothing good happened. Tony took his favorite flavor of pizza from Oba. In the past, he would always start with this when there was any bad news. You can't always think something's wrong just because I brought pizza from New York, right? Then tell me what good thing you want to say. Facing Tony, who was looking forward to it, Obadia was speechless and could only say truthfully in the end. No, I know it, no need to say more, I have something else to do. When Tony heard the bad news again, he immediately lost interest in listening to it. He ate the last piece of steak on the plate and then got up and wanted to avoid it all for the time being, but how could Obadia let him go so easily? Tony's stock price has plummeted again today. Sure enough, after he yelled, Tony stopped. How much did it fall again? Tony asked rather impatiently. Although he knew this was a normal situation, Tony was still sad to hear that his company's stock price had dropped. Every share fell by 56 yuan. At this time, Pepper came out of the kitchen carrying the freshly cooked steak and interrupted. So what? After hearing this, Tony felt nothing. It was even much better than he expected. Seeing this, Obadia could only continue to exert pressure. Listen, Tony, the board has announced that you have post-concussion syndrome and they are applying for an injunction. Tony, what? Stop your work. Just because our stock dropped 40 points. But what does that matter because we have a controlling interest in the company? What Tony was talking about was the amount of equity he owned after joining forces with Obadia, but what he didn't expect was that his father's good partner, one of the founders of Stark, now had no intention of siding with him. Tony, the board of directors also has power. They believe that you and your new ideas are not in the best interests of the company. Of course, Obadia would not choose to join forces with Tony, as this would not achieve the purpose of forcing him. In fact, he also contributed to the situation after the board meeting. Then I will take responsibility. It is a new starting point for me and the company. In fact, the company should be responsible. Tony also realized that Obadia was not on his side, but even so, he still would not choose to give in and reopen the arms business. Tony's words were within Obadiah's expectation. He knew it would reach this point, and had calculated in advance that if he had to use his personal power, it would require a high price. This is also true for Tony Stark, who has a net worth of hundreds of millions. It can be considered a stretch. Tony also knows the consequences he will bear. To be honest, it makes him upset. Now he just wants to find a place to relax, and the laboratory is a good place. Come on, hey, Tony. Obadia once again prevented him from leaving, and this time he was ready to tell his true intention of coming. Listen to me, I will try to reverse this situation, but you give me reasons to convince them. As he said this, Obadia tapped the small reactor on Tony's chest with his hand, a trace of greed flashing in his eyes. No, absolutely impossible. It can only belong to me. After Tony made a strong statement, he went straight downstairs. Obadia stayed there and looked at the pizza on the table and sighed helplessly. Maybe give Tony some time and he'll think about it. Pepper looked at Obadia, who seemed to be heartbroken about Tony, and couldn't help but offer words of comfort. Obadia, I hope so. Outside the villa, Robert held his mobile phone in one hand and played with the flowers and plants on the roadside with the other hand. I think you have to come to Washington as soon as possible. I don't know if it was S.H.I.E.L.D. or whoever caused your trouble. Now it's up to the president to give the order. Burns's voice rang on the other end of the phone, and his tired voice made Robert blame himself. Okay Burns, I'll come to Washington on Saturday. Today and Thursday are not a few days away. Then I will personally meet those monsters and monsters. Ha ha ha, good, I hope you can still create myths this time. Burns was relieved when Robert gave an exact date. To be honest, there was a lot of pressure on him from all parties in the past 2 days, but with Robert's promise, all the problems were solved. At the same time, Burns also believes that Robert has the ability to deal with those problems. After all, no matter how cunning politicians are, they can still make trouble in the face of absolute strength. S.H.I.E.L.D., or others, if they want my ability, they have to think carefully about themselves. Robert looked toward the west coast in the direction of Washington. He knew that there were people in the top brass of the United States who had been coveting his ability. If Burns hadn't been helping him, maybe someone would have appeared at the bedside in the evening and invited him to drink tea. Robert hated this way of forcing himself and his friends. He had already made up his mind that after arriving in Washington, it would be fine if those people came to be soft. If some people didn't understand and insisted on being hard, then he would show these people the hard way. When Obadia left, the two happened to meet at the door. Tony admires you very much, do a good job young man. Like a kind elder, Obadia patted Robert's shoulder affectionately as if to encourage him. Thanks. As the saying goes, don't hit the smiling man. Even though he knew that he was the real murderer Tony was looking for, in order to keep the plot on the original basic track, Robert still chose to wait for a while before exposing him. The exchange between the two was very short, only 2 or 3 sentences, and then Obadia left in a hurry. Robert, who guessed what he might be doing, smiled and turned back to the house. Authentication failed, but the embarrassing thing is that Tony's 1-hour order is still in effect, and Robert can only use the wall again. Back at the villa, I was about to go to my room to rest for a while, but when I passed by the restaurant. Robert, your steak. As soon as he entered, Pepper pointed at the plate of freshly fried steak on the table and said, I am full. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Pepper holding his arms. Just now you had time to stop me from making another one, but you didn't. I think this means you have the ability to solve it, right? Pepper looked at him seriously, as if to say that Robert would be wasting her labor if she didn't finish the steak. Fine, Mr. Robert, the boss invites you to the garage. Just as he was about to compromise, the voice of artificial intelligence Jarvis rang. It must be something big. Can you help me put it in the refrigerator first? Pointing to the steak, Robert rubbed oil on his soles and ran away without looking at Pepper's helpless expression. Okay, trial 37, version 2.0, let's try it again. At this time, in the spacious garage, Tony quickly set up an experimental platform and began experiments on his own thruster. No, but when he was about to start, Robert suddenly jumped out and held him down. The experiment failed and force majeure was encountered. Tony, what are you doing? He didn't understand why Robert suddenly went crazy. Robert, what are you doing? I ignored him at all and quickly scanned the cars in the garage. I breathed a sigh of relief after finding that they were all in good condition. Okay, I've given you the keys, but you have to take good care of them on time. That's the most basic thing. Before Tony could finish his words, Robert grabbed 3 car keys. At first, he didn't want to let go. Tony watched with pain as Robert took away the keys to his car. Tony was very sad. Okay, I don't have anywhere to put them, so I'll leave them here, but you have to protect them from getting damaged. Judging from Tony's appearance, Robert estimated that he really liked these cars. Robert, who was just having a playful attitude, didn't need to care about these ownership issues. Robert, to be honest, sometimes you are quite considerate. Looking at the lost key in his hand, Tony said with some sincerity. Whatever, I'm going to bed later, why did you ask me to come over? Oh, this is the USB flash drive you want. I guarantee that not many defense systems in the world can withstand it. After handing him the USB flash drive, Tony started his own experiment again. The 3 cars he selected had been parked in corners under Robert's strong suggestion, and the possibility of damage was greatly reduced. Okay, I'll leave first. Although the birth of Iron Man is very interesting and necessary to witness, judging from the current stage of Tony's progress, it will take at least a few days to complete. The next day, Robert ran to school through the space gate again. Even though he was halfway across the United States, there was still no pressure on him who had now recovered. Good morning, Robert. Peter, good morning, you look good today. When Robert met Peter at school in the morning, he found that his spirit was obviously different, and some very subtle perceptions told him that Peter was different. I feel 100% more energetic now. Not only did he look good, Peter himself felt that his condition was much better. He felt like he could wrestle an adult bull now. Robert, just as he was about to praise Peter again, Belinda's voice suddenly ended everything. Robert looked toward the source of the sound and found Belinda running towards her with 2 sandwiches in her hands. Did you have breakfast? When I came to Robert, in addition to being a little out of breath from the 2 runs just now, I was also a little nervous caused by shyness. I won't disturb you anymore, see you in the classroom. As soon as Peter saw the situation, he knew that he was here to have breakfast with Robert. After giving him an envious look, he chose to take the first step. Okay, Peter. Looking at Peter Parker's retreating back, Robert took the sandwich from Belinda's hand and took a bite. How do you know I didn't have breakfast? Taking Belinda to the ornamental lake in the center of the school, Robert asked with some confusion. You said something yesterday. The girl also held a sandwich in her hand. She took small bites while answering Robert's questions. Belinda's dress today was very conventional. She wore a loose pink long sleeves that made her look a little cute. She wore a pair of jeans underneath, and a pair of white canvas shoes on her feet, which was a little negative. I'll take you to buy some clothes tonight. Seeing Belinda, who was as beautiful as a Barbie doll, wearing these things, Robert couldn't bear it, so he simply said. No need, I still have a lot of clothes. Belinda subconsciously didn't want to trouble Robert, but before she could finish her words, she was pulled into his arms and said in his ear with an unmistakable voice. Obedient. Belinda made a little sound from her nasal cavity, and was used to Robert's dominance. The day passes a little too fast. Someone said that if you repeat something for a long time every day, people will feel that time flies. This is how Robert feels now. If Peter hadn't explained some knowledge to him every day, this day would have gone by even faster. After all, understanding something is not exactly the same as doing the same thing again. Time flies by when he comes to school every day to listen to the Bible. Belinda, wait for me here for a while, and I'll go get the car. At the school gate, Robert, who had agreed to take Belinda to buy clothes, immediately asked her to wait where she was. After all, they couldn't walk there, right? So Robert had already thought about it. At first, he was planning to go back through the space gate and drive the Audi car. But he suddenly realized that he had won 3 Tony cars yesterday. The 50th experiment, version 3.0 starts experimenting. In Tony's underground parking garage, the steel suit has been almost optimized by him. This is much faster than Robert predicted, but just when he was doing debugging experiments, a huge amount of blue light hole appeared. Now aside. Oh. Tony hurriedly stopped his flight path from approaching the blue light hole. He didn't want to enter this unknown thing in a daze and die without knowing how. Hey, Tony, are you there? I'm going to drive out, do you want to come? As soon as Robert came out of the light hole, he saw Tony flying in the air, but his words were obviously polite. After all, he chose a Bugatti limited edition sports car that could only seat 2 people. Okay, I just happened to be tired from doing experiments all day long. Unexpectedly, Tony actually agreed. Cultural differences. This time it was Robert's turn to be embarrassed. He scratched his head and finally thought of an optimal solution. I have another person over there, please drive another car. Robert pointed at the one that was obviously enlarged by him, the gate of space, and said to Tony. Then let me drive this car. Tony, who had already made up his mind to go out to relax, directly chose an Audi sports car closest to Robert. He seemed to have a soft spot for Audi cars. Okay, follow me and don't fall behind. After Robert saw Tony finish lighting the ignition, he directly lowered the car window and said something to him, then drove directly through the space door that had not been closed. Wang! The roar of the engine of a top-notch sports car echoed outside Zhongcheng High School, and Robert's relatively hidden alley also attracted attention because of this roar. Gone. I've never played before. Why are you so fierce all of a sudden? Seeing that many people were attracted, Robert quickly looked at the space door at the back. Tony was still inside and had not come out. He could not close it, otherwise Iron Man might be gone in the future. Wow, what a handsome car. Is this a Bugatti? Why haven't I seen this one online? It won't be a limited edition, right? TCH. Do you know how much the limited edition costs? Dip. Dip. Just as more and more students were watching, the sound of trumpets sounded behind them. After seeing that Tony had completely passed through the gate of space, Robert hurriedly took back the power of space. Without the supply of energy, the open space door also disappeared automatically. Fortunately, it was before anyone saw it. You seem to be very nervous. Why? Your own special ability. Tony drove to Robert. He looked around just now as if he was afraid of being seen. But Robert didn't steal anything, so he could only be afraid that his special ability would be seen. Well, let's go first. My girlfriend is waiting there. Robert nodded with lingering fear, then lightly stepped on the accelerator and left here. Tony hesitated behind him. Originally he wanted to say something to Robert, but after looking at the students gathered around him and not wanting to be viewed as an exhibit, Tony decided to leave here before talking. Belinda could see many people watching something from a distance. She didn't care about it. She only knew that Robert asked her to wait here for a while. Buzz. Who would have thought that as soon as the sports car drove out from the crowd of onlookers, it drove towards her blankly, and finally stopped in front of her. Boarding. Belinda was confused, when the window of the sports car suddenly lowered, and Robert's voice came from inside. Ah, okay. Buzz. Tony followed closely behind, and when he saw a girl getting into Robert's car and saw that it was in front of the school, he suddenly felt that the flowers of America had been destroyed. Beast. After scolding Robert, Tony, who was used to being romantic, suddenly thought that he seemed to have tried almost all types. Snapped. How can I be like this beast? That thought was cut off by Tony as soon as it came up. He slapped his thigh and began to warn him not to imitate the bad guys. Ring ring ring. At this time, Tony's phone rang. It was a stranger and he wanted to hang up, but at this moment the car window in front suddenly lowered, and Robert took the phone and waved to him. Hello, it's me Tony. Robert's voice came from the other end of the phone. I don't remember calling you. Tony was very puzzled by this. I asked Pepper for it. Now I'm going to take my girlfriend to buy clothes. Do you want to come with me? I don't have anywhere to go anyway, so let's come together. Tony's indifferent voice sounded, and Robert, who originally thought he would refuse, was a little unexpected. Okay, then you follow me, beep. After hanging up the phone, Robert drove towards the city, found a clothing store that looked pretty good, and prepared to get out of the car and go in. Ring ring ring. At this time, his phone rang. Robert looked at the Audi sports car following him strangely, but finally answered the call without getting out of the car. Hello, please, you don't just want to buy clothes for your girlfriend in a place like this, do you? His tone was full of disgust, and Robert looked at Belinda sitting there obediently next to him, her beautiful eyes blinking at him, as if trying to spot some flowers. Hey, he couldn't help but reach out and pinch her face, causing others to moan. Then where did you say you were going? After doing this, Robert asked Tony on the other end of the phone. Follow me. After saying that, Tony turned off the phone, then kicked the accelerator and passed in front of Robert, and now he was leading the way. Actually, you don't have to buy something too good. Belinda was in the passenger seat, watching Robert drive the car into a more prosperous urban area. She heard some conversations just now and spoke out. But this time Robert ignored her. In Times Square, New York, Tony took Robert and parked the car outside first, then walked in and took him to the door of a store. That's it. Although their clothes are not as good as custom-made ones, they are better because they have more styles, workmanship and materials are better. Robert raised his head and looked at the store. Although there is still a large store in such a place where land is so valuable, the decoration inside is both luxurious and stylish, and it looks good. Should we buy clothes here, but they look good. What did you do to your girlfriend? Before Belinda could finish her words, Tony, who was standing aside, looked at Robert in surprise, feeling as if he was abusing a young girl. Okay, why don't you just bring it with you and buy it? Times Square was full of people at this time, and even though he didn't know him, Robert felt a little embarrassed when he was ridiculed in front of so many people. Hee, ha ha ha, it's fine. Seeing Robert's embarrassed look, Tony couldn't help laughing. The depression accumulated in his heart seemed to be relieved a lot, but it was Belinda who came to comfort Robert. Look, that person seems to be Tony Stark. Where is Beely? Robert and his group were standing in Times Square. Where they didn't notice, two reporters with press credentials hanging on their chests, who were originally preparing to cover food safety issues, suddenly discovered Tony, who was laughing. Oh my God, it's really him. I heard that all the major media are going crazy looking for him. If I could interview him, the material would definitely attract competition from various companies. How much money would it cost? Stop talking and hurry up, catch up. Of course, Tony would not catch Robert's embarrassment. In fact, he just laughed for a while and then returned to his seriousness, straightened his clothes and walked into the store. Welcome, how can I help? As soon as they entered the store, a dignified-looking service staff came up to receive Robert and the others. Buy some clothes for this lady, take it with you. Tony pointed at Belinda to indicate that she was the one buying the clothes. Okay miss, please go this way. Belinda was led away. When Robert saw this, he originally wanted to follow, but was stopped by Tony. What, Tony? Look up there. Pointing to a sign above, the prompt was that only men are allowed in the ladies section. Belinda, who took a few steps forward, saw that Robert did not follow her, so she quickly turned her head to look at him, her eyes full of doubts. Robert followed suit and pointed to the sign above, and motioned to Belinda to just choose it herself. Why do you seem so familiar with this place? Please, my previous title was Playboy. You have to know that some women can't be obtained by just giving them money. You have to give them a sense of ritual and take them shopping. Tony said to Robert with a proud face, as if his familiarity with these things was worth showing off. Robert chuckled without a smile. Well, it seems you're not interested. When Tony saw Robert's reaction, he knew that what he just said would not attract him. What about money? How about I teach you how to make money? Tony looked at Robert with burning eyes as if he were looking at a treasure house, which made him very uncomfortable. You talk a lot today, Tony, what do you want to say? Tony, money. You still care about money. Robert felt it was a joke. The famous tycoon Tony Stark told himself that he was interested in money. You must know that Boss Ma on the other side of the ocean would have no interest in money without him. Money is only part of it. My real goal is to lead the progress of mankind. Tony suddenly became serious. Then let's talk about money. Robert obviously doesn't resonate with him in terms of leading human progress. But Tony didn't feel annoyed about this, or even angry. Instead, he looked directly into Robert's eyes and told him firmly. The ability you have is the huge amounts of wealth for humanity, you know. To prove what he said, Tony started to give examples. Why are the east and west coasts of the United States so economically developed? It's because they are close to the ocean and sea navigation is full of convenience and transportation is cheap. But if you can use technology similar to your ability, will the convenience be comparable to that of the ocean? In the rest area, Tony drew a grand blueprint for Robert. For example, ordinary people in the city would not have to bear the high rent. They could work in the big city during the day and go directly back to their hometown thousands of miles away to rest and sleep at night. In this way, people will no longer pay too much attention to real estate and will have more spare money in their hands. In addition, by applying technology similar to Robert's, Space Gate, rescue can arrive as soon as possible in response to various disasters. Far more than that, when transportation reaches the ultimate convenience, the country's economy will usher in a big wave of development, and GDP will be pushed up by at least 10 percentage points. Tony made a bold prediction here, which not only includes economic benefits, but also includes environmental, humanistic and other benefits. Well, how do I get it applied? Friend, you are standing in front of one of the top scientists in the United States, if not one of them. Tony stood opposite Robert and said complacently. However, he does have the capital to be proud and complacent. Not many people can successfully research the miniaturization technology of his chest reactor. Mr. Tony Stark is there. I found him. Robert and Tony were about to discuss it more deeply, but suddenly they discovered that a large group of people were coming towards them. These people all had one characteristic: they were all armed with long guns and short cannons. Billy, did you betray this news? How could it be me? I thought it was you. The two reporters who were among the reporters who first discovered Tony did not admit that they had betrayed the information. Only they knew the truth. Mr. Stark, why did you suddenly announce the closure of the arms manufacturing department? Don't you know that this will have a devastating blow to Stark Industries' stock price? Yes, Mr. Stark. Other than that, do you have anything to say about the Stark Corporation Board of Directors announcing that you suffer from post-concussion syndrome? Is this true? CNN reporter, Mr. Stark, your current condition does not seem like you have a concussion. Does this mean there are major differences or even internal strife within your company? A lot of people started asking impatiently before they even gathered in front of Tony. Tony, run Robert, run quickly, you won't be able to escape after being trapped by these people for several hours, especially now without bodyguards. As he said that, he pulled Robert and ran in the opposite direction. Belinda happened to have her clothes chosen at this moment, and Robert grabbed her. Charge it to me. Tony said something to the shopping guide who had not yet reacted, and then he took Robert and the others and ran wildly. Mr. Tony, don't run. Mr. Stark. As soon as the shopping guide nodded in confusion, he was overwhelmed by a large group of reporters. Quick, hurry up. At the corner of the toilet, Tony said eagerly. Robert nodded immediately with understanding and quickly opened the space door to Tony's house. Call. Sitting on the floor of the underground garage, Tony, who was not very physically strong, breathed a sigh of relief. What happened? Belinda, who had passed through the gate of space for the first time, looked at Robert with a face full of shock. It was obvious that she could not understand what just happened with her knowledge. A supernatural power. If you insist on a rational explanation, you can understand it as a product of technology. Robert explained from the sidelines that he didn't want Belinda to know too much, and he couldn't explain why. As our country already so developed, Belinda obviously accepted this most reasonable explanation. After all, there is nothing more suitable than this, right? Okay, Belinda, now that we're done for the day, I guess we should say goodnight to each other, okay? Robert opened a space door, handed the clothes and pants he received from the shopping guide to Belinda's hands, and then motioned for her to pass through the space door. Oh, okay, I wonder where this leads to. The new home you just moved into yesterday. After saying the last sentence, Robert pushed the somewhat timid girl into the blue light door, and then stretched her head to take a look to make sure there was no problem before leaving. Why did you hide it from her? Tony watched the whole process from the side and asked with some confusion. I have no idea. Robert himself doesn't have an answer to this question. Maybe it's something that causes the gap, or maybe it's something else. Okay, let's talk about something else. What? Tony, your ability, you don't seem to want to expose it in public, why? Isn't that a cool thing? I don't want to be cool. Tony seemed unable to understand Robert's answer, because in his opinion, was there anything more interesting than pretending? Let's not talk about this anymore. You just said that it is feasible to imitate technology similar to my ability. If it is successful, then can I live a lifetime just lying down like the toll station owner? Tony, please, don't just think about the toll station, okay? Your thinking is still stuck in the last century. Tony was quite contemptuous of the idea that Robert had no innovation and had an attitude of just eating and waiting to die. He began to introduce to Robert the increase in GDP that would be achieved if this scientific research project was really completed, as well as the huge contribution it would make to human society. Ah, good, good. Now let's talk about how to apply it, shall we? Too lazy to listen to Tony's high-sounding words, Robert concluded that all he wanted was to leave his name in history. Now, I'm afraid it's not possible. Looking at the improved armor he was about to take shape, Tony felt that it was more important at the moment. Then let's talk about it when you have time. Robert also saw the steel suit on the side and knew that it was undoubtedly more important and urgent for Tony. Okay, I'll start this great research as soon as I'm free. After the two reached an agreement, Robert was ready to go back to the guest room to sleep, but suddenly he seemed to remember something. Belinda, who was coming out of the bathroom, suddenly saw Robert walking out of the blue light hole, wearing only a bath towel. She was immediately startled. Why are you here? She didn't relax until she saw the person clearly, but she still subconsciously tightened the towel. Hey, Robert told her with practical actions, and a little white sheep appeared in front of her almost instantly. In his previous life, Robert once read on the internet that some great people said that white people seem to be refined but are actually rough, while black people seem to be rough. This is total fart. Robert was stroking a piece of white greasy in his hand at this time, and he got the truth after experiencing it personally. More than 2 hours later. I originally wanted to go to the hospital to take care of my mother after taking a shower. On the bed in the bedroom, Belinda lay on Robert with lingering moisture on her face, stroking the muscles of his chest while talking. I remember that I paid for the VIP ward. Don't they have a dedicated medical staff to take care of it? Robert felt a little confused about Belinda's words, because he spent a lot of money on that ward at that time. Yes, there is, but I'm afraid my mother won't be used to it. After hearing what she said, Robert thought about it and finally decided to send her on a trip. Get dressed. It's not too late for me to see you off, but I'm still afraid it won't be safe. Belinda stood up obediently and subconsciously wanted to get her old clothes and put them on, but the large and small bags of new clothes were neatly placed aside by her. Wear new ones, otherwise I will throw away these things. No, I'll wear it right away. Seeing that she was obedient, Robert nodded with satisfaction. Suddenly he remembered two things, so he walked to the balcony and made a phone call. A few seconds later, "Hello, Robert," Tony's voice came from the other end. "Tony, did you send someone to pick up the car we parked in Times Square?" "Oh, I almost forgot, I'm going to call Happy to go." As he said that, he was about to hang up the phone. Etc. Robert hurriedly stopped hanging up the phone, then looked at Belinda who was changing clothes, and decided to close the balcony door before talking. "Tony, I'm sorry, I was a little, taking advantage of you. I'll pay you back the money I paid for Belinda's clothes and house." After all, Robert in his previous life was just an ordinary person, and he had not adapted to many of his thoughts, such as being greedy for petty gains. Tony on the opposite side didn't expect Robert to say this. After a moment of silence, he replied, "I have never cared about this, Robert. In fact, I know that you were frozen in the 70s. It is natural for me to think that you have no money. After all, except for the precious small part of the previous currency, it is basically useless now. If it hadn't been like this, you wouldn't have had a place to live, right? So there's no need to apologize. If nothing else, just for my father's sake." Robert understood what Tony said, and it probably meant that he came to him because he thought he would live in poverty after waking up and had no other options. "So just think of that money as what I gave you on behalf of my father. It's really not worth mentioning to me." On Tony's part, he had already understood that Robert was embarrassed to accept his funding, which was the so-called damaged self-esteem, so he tried to comfort this friend who had been recognized by him. After all, not many people could admit their shortcomings. Thank you, Tony, but I still have to pay you back the money. This will make me feel better. I don't need it, I don't care. Tony, who always thought Robert was a poor man, refused to ask for his money. After several pulls, Robert hung up the phone and opened the banking software on his phone and sent him a screenshot of his balance. After doing this, Robert put down his cell phone, turned around and began to leisurely watch the night view of New York City, until his cell phone rang again a dozen seconds later. Pay me back, Robert. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you had more than $100 million? I thought you were poor and wanted to take you in, but you ended up pretending to be poor with more than $100 million. Tony's sounding voice came from the other end of the phone. Sometimes he seemed really angry, and sometimes his tone sounded like a joke. It's true that I don't have a home to live in. I'll bet you that you know how to walk through the wall. That was done after drilling several holes in my original house. Robert didn't want to have any misunderstanding with him, so he explained aloud, but what he got in exchange was a period of silence followed by ruthless ridicule. Quote, "Ha ha ha. Sometimes I really feel like you were a comedian. Which normal person would experiment with such dangerous things in his own home? Ha ha. Then what are you doing now? Ah, hiccup." Robert's words directly choked Tony. He turned around and looked at the steel suit being tested and suddenly realized that he didn't seem to be normal either. Ha, I'm just kidding. Since you have money, do whatever you want. I'm going to do an experiment. Goodbye. Tony hung up the phone rather embarrassed. Robert smiled, opened the mobile banking and transferred $500,000 to Tony's previous so-called mission account. Even if he paid back the money, he was not going to take any money from it in the future. From this moment on, Robert had some changes that he himself was not even aware of. Okay, are you ready? Robert walked back from the balcony to the house. He originally planned to take Belinda to the hospital to take care of her mother, but when he saw her halfway through changing into new clothes, she suddenly couldn't walk. Ah, not yet. Can you help me see what kind of underwear to wear? The shopping guide seems to have brought me such things. As she spoke, Belinda picked up a pair of crystal stockings with a distressed expression. This thing is pretty good, why don't you put it on and take a look? Belinda, but I'm wearing a top right now. Wouldn't it be weird to wear stockings like this? It's okay, put it on and take a look. Robert's nose was filled with heat at this time. He stared at Belinda for a second and immediately pounced on her after she obeyed his words and put on her stockings. Ah, soon ripples appeared in the living room, which was not enough for outsiders to explain. It was another few hours of tossing, but Robert was afraid that Belinda wouldn't be able to bear it, so he didn't fight all night. Human body limits YYDS. Robert praised in his heart. 9 o'clock in the morning. Ring ring. The sound of the phone rang, waking Robert up. He quickly covered the phone and silenced it quickly. Then he looked at Belinda, who was hugging him, and breathed a sigh of relief when he found that she had not been awakened. Hello. In the living room, Robert poured himself a glass of water before answering the phone. Uncle Robert, I'm at your door. I think you still remember today's hearing, right? Dean stood outside Robert's original house, and after ringing the doorbell several times to no avail, he chose to make the call. Ah, I remember you waited for me for a while. In fact, he had almost forgotten about it. If Dean hadn't come to pick him up, he might have missed it. Dean. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Robert hurriedly dressed and freshened up briefly before opening the space door and returning to his original home in the suburbs. As soon as he came back, he saw several big holes. Robert felt it was a miracle that they hadn't collapsed yet. Uncle Robert, when he opened the door from the house, he saw Dean, who had been waiting for him for a long time. He greeted him as usual, but he was shocked when he saw the scene in the house behind Robert. Are you going to do a second renovation? It took a while for Dean to come back to his senses and ask. This seemed to be the only reasonable explanation at the moment. Absolutely, but obviously the renovation failed and the load-bearing wall was damaged. This is a house provided by the government. How much should I pay? This. I'll go back and ask. It shouldn't cost much. The price for the government to acquire these houses is quite low. As he spoke, Dean led Robert to get into the car. He had no intention of worrying about the issue of a villa right now. The top priority now was to get Robert to attend the hearing and shut up those people who were jumping around. Uncle Robert, this is the manuscript we prepared for you. Just read it according to it when the time comes. Ah, okay. After getting in the car, Dean handed Robert some manuscripts and emphasized that just read them according to them, as if the hearing was just a formality. Well, remember, Dean, so fast. Aha, by the way, Dean, are we going to Washington? Robert did not show off his memory, but looked at Dean driving and asked a question he was more concerned about. Yes, Uncle Robert, but this hearing was held at a military base on the outskirts of Washington. The participants were mainly senior military officials and some senior government officials, and some others were watching via video. Okay, I don't care who participates. You just need to tell me the coordinates. It's too slow to walk like this. The coordinates of the military base. Try to choose a place that is close to the base but less crowded. 38, 53, 707 degrees north latitude, west. Even though he didn't understand it, Dean still told him the location that met Robert's requirements. Just when Dean was confused and wanted to ask a question, a blue light hole that was huge enough to easily accommodate the entire car suddenly appeared in front of him. Oh, what is this? GG. Discovering the unexpected situation, Dean subconsciously slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The military jeep still relied on inertia and rushed directly into the blue light hole. Don't get excited, I made that thing, just drive it. Robert reminded Dean and told him not to be nervous. This blue light hole is naturally the space crack or door that Robert opened with his power of space. The condition for opening it is that Robert must know the accurate coordinates to achieve it. Also relying on his own super memory ability, he has figured out the basic information of the globe. It is like knowing a map. Next, Robert only needs an accurate address to appear at any time on the Earth he thinks of, throughout. Of course, all this must be established when there is a map of the Earth, so that you can find the exact place you want to go on. If you don't have this map, the destination will be random. This is amazing. Dean looked at the flowers and trees that appeared beside him. This was exactly the coordinates he had just told Robert, a suburban road in the suburbs of Washington. Since this road was built mainly to facilitate the entry and exit of personnel and materials from the military base, few people usually come here. This is my ability. Dean regained his composure after a brief shock, but still praised. This is really divine power. Robert is noncommittal about this. Next, Dean took Robert to the military base. Since the meeting was in the afternoon, they had arrived much earlier and seemed to have no choice but to wait. Robert walked around this U.S. military base in the morning. I have to say that when he saw those cool helicopters and powerful tanks, Robert's DNA moved. Robert was dazzled by the array of equipment such as helicopters, tanks, armored vehicles, etc. He and Dean spent the whole morning in the place where these equipment were stored. Because both of them were colonels and were on the same level as the highest commander of the military base, no one came to stop them. Robert climbed onto the top of a tank, and just as he was about to sit in and take a look, a soldier ran over and said something to Dean. Dean nodded and shouted to Robert, "Uncle Robert, the hearing has begun." This meeting was chaired by Major General Moore and was attended by members of the two largest parties in the Federation. I heard that even the president is very interested in this meeting and may follow it through a live broadcast. Dean made a brief introduction to Robert. After Robert expressed understanding, they entered the meeting hall, which should have been temporarily set up by the combat headquarters. Colonel Robert Betty, please take a seat. As soon as he entered, an old man in a general's uniform motioned for Robert to sit down in the middle. There were many positions displayed on both sides of that position, and there were people on them. After Robert sat down, he looked at the position of Major General Moore, which was deliberately raised. Looking at the surrounding situation, he felt like he was on trial. Moore, okay, Colonel Robert is already in place, I declare the meeting to begin. Now let's watch a video. As he spoke, Moore winked at the soldier on the side, who immediately started playing the video on the screen that had been prepared. Ho, you bugs. The figure of hatred appears in the video, and the first thing is that it can be called devastating damage. In the video, the U.S. military, whether using rifles, machine guns, or artillery shells, was unable to cause substantial damage to it until Robert's appearance. The hatred that was still arrogant just now seemed to have a hand swallowed up by a ball of blue energy directly in front of Robert. When it wanted to withdraw, the blue light disappeared, and the hand of hatred also disappeared. Oh my God. Some people present obviously had not seen this video beforehand and were surprised to see it now. Okay, Colonel Robert, now let's get to the point. Is the blue energy that appeared in front of you to block the hateful attack something you possess, regardless of whether it exists in the form of a weapon? General Moore had seen this battle video, so he did not show surprise, but asked questions calmly. It's what I own. Robert didn't want to deny anything, so he raised his hand and a ball of blue, space power, appeared in front of people. But it's not in the form of a weapon but an ability. Incredible. General Moore and everyone at the scene stared at the energy ball in Robert's hand. They came to their senses after more than 10 seconds as Robert collected the energy supply. Ahem. Colonel Robert, if the files recorded 70 years ago were still a normal person, what about you now? General Moore withdrew his shocked eyes, sat back on the bench and continued to ask. All I know is that I touched a blue magic, and then these abilities suddenly appeared. Robert started to talk nonsense. He told half-truths and half-false stories about how he obtained the ability. Anyway, it was impossible for these people to check the ability box in his body. Let's call that thing an energy demon. Last time you mentioned it to S.H.I.E.L.D. We also sent people to try it, but nothing was gained by touching it. Instead, we lost several outstanding talents. A Democratic Party member interjected, apparently he had some involvement with S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't know about that. Robert spread his hands and said that he didn't know, which did not satisfy the Democratic Party congressman. I actually tend to believe you, Robert, but just because you don't know it doesn't mean that modern technology doesn't know it. Maybe you can go to our laboratory. Enough. Do you want a colonel from our US military, a combat hero 70 years ago, to go and do human experiments in your dirty laboratory? After hearing what the Democratic Party congressman said, Robert's face became very gloomy. He understood that the man meant nothing more than to do human research to get answers, but when he was about to explode, someone else got there first. Robert looked at the man and found that he was a congressman representative of the Labor Party, another major party in the United States, but he did not think that this congressman really spoke for him because of his achievements 70 years ago. Looking towards Dean's position, Robert immediately understood which side he was on when he saw him blinking. I will never accept so-called human experiments. In a free and democratic America, I think no one would force citizens to do it, right? After understanding his own camp, Robert immediately stated his bottom line. Upon seeing this, the Labor MP quickly helped. Not only that, Robert, you are also an American hero and soldier. If you go against your wishes, the people will definitely be very angry if they find out. Robert can't be allowed to appear randomly in public life without doing research. The abilities he can use are so terrifying. What if one day the Democratic Party congressmen still refused to give up? Seeing that human research was not working, they retreated to the next best option and prepared to imprison Robert and restrict his movements. Our citizens have the right to freedom, which is given to them by the Constitution. Labor MPs strongly rebuttal. The Democratic Party also showed no sign of weakness. But Colonel Robert is also a soldier. He has to obey the orders of the Supreme Commander. Okay, be quiet and let's hear what Colonel Robert himself has to say. Seeing that even the Supreme Commander of the Democratic Party had moved out, Major General Moore quickly avoided the topic and asked Robert to speak instead. Well, first of all, what I want to state here is that I have never pointed my gun at the people. It was the same 70 years ago and it is the same today. There was such a paragraph in the manuscript that Dean gave him. It seemed that they knew that this might happen, and Robert started memorizing the manuscript without caring. I am willing to contribute to peace in the United States and the world. This article can only be said to be quite satisfactory. There is nothing too eye-catching, but I can't find anything wrong with it. However, this cannot prevent someone from deliberately making things difficult. You can't just say it, it depends on what you do. I and the Democratic Party behind me both believe that Colonel Robert needs to be quarantined for a period of time. Labor Party. Firmly opposed. Democratic Party. Then you might as well ask the Supreme Commander of the Army for his opinion. Labor. You, the Supreme Commander, now the President of the United States, is from the Democratic Party, which is why the Democratic Party dares to press forward so hard. Major General Moore sat in the highest position and listened to the quarrel between the two parties. At this time, he knew that his role was gone. Now he had to wait for a higher-up to speak before the tone could be set. Ring ring ring. Sure enough, an encrypted phone call came after a while. General Moore adjusted his makeup and answered seriously. Mr. President, General Moore, I order the end of this witness meeting. Colonel Robert can enjoy his freedom. Yes. Moore was stunned when he heard the order. He didn't understand. The people of the Democratic Party dancing so happily must have the support of him, the president of the same Democratic Party faction. But why didn't that seem to be the case? The president has ordered that Colonel Robert does not need to be monitored or even imprisoned. Although he couldn't figure it out, Moore still resolutely carried out the order of the Supreme Commander. At the same time, in the Oval Office of the President of the White House. General Freeman, please always remember and keep your promise. Don't worry, Mr. President, you won't be disappointed. Freeman, one of the two top generals of the U.S. military, left the office directly after saying this, while the president looked at his back and fell into deep thought. General Wells, the mission failed. Mr. President seems. The hearing is over, and the Democratic Party congressman who was chatting happily is now hiding in the corner talking on the phone with a big shot. Humph, I know. At the Pentagon, Wells hung up the phone, a little angry about the betrayal of his ally, but it didn't last long after all. This man would step down in a few months. Oh, Robert, since Freeman insists on protecting you, then I must kill you. As the saying goes, there is no room for two tigers in one mountain, but there are two tigers, him and Freeman, in the Pentagon. This has led to a long-term confrontation between the two, but they have always maintained a balanced line, which means that there is mutual victory or defeat. But all this ended with the appearance of Robert. Wells was not afraid of Robert's ability, but was afraid that his ability could be copied. This is what he cares about most. Since he woke up, Robert has been labeled as Freeman, which makes Wells very afraid that Freeman will have the ability to copy with his cooperation. Wells, who has always been cautious, felt threatened this time, so he desperately wanted to kill Robert. If it didn't work on the surface, then, hey, send someone to perform a first-level mission. He made an encrypted phone call, told the other party the mission and then hung up. The reason why he was so cautious was because it was an organization that only served him. Except for the management staff, the people there are basically serious criminals wanted in the United States and even the world. Any sin on his body could lead to death hundreds of times. This kind of person is very suitable for tasks that cannot be seen in the light. Dean, I want to convey my gratitude to your father, and to you as well, but I think it can be expressed in person. The hearing in the corridor of the military base has ended, and Robert has finally gotten rid of some people's difficulties. The people sent by Wells were destined to be in vain, because Robert did not take the usual route at all. He directly found a hidden corner and then opened the space door, and walked back to his home in the uptown area. Robert originally wanted to come to see Belinda, but when he arrived, he found that she was already asleep. Maybe I'm tired. Robert touched his nose, and at the same time, he began to say to the person who said, there are only exhausted oxen, and no plowed fields, that it mainly depends on the person, well, not the ability of an ox. Quietly exiting the bedroom, this house does have another room, but in the end, Robert decided to stay at Tony's house for one night because he was afraid of disturbing Belinda's rest. A blue light hole appeared, and after stepping through it, he was still in the garage, but Tony, who was always there, didn't know where he had gone this time. Just as Robert was about to leave the garage, there was a noise from the top floor. Boom, beep beep beep. A humanoid heavy object suddenly fell from the sky and hit a blue sports car. A robot equipped with a fire extinguisher next to it was still spraying fire extinguishing smoke at it. Whoa whoa. Robert ran over quickly, and when the dust cleared, he saw that it was indeed Tony. Did you succeed or fail? Reaching out to give Tony a hand, Robert didn't forget to tease him. Successful, of course very successful. Tony wore a steel armor and was stubborn in front of Robert, but when he stood up and bumped his head a little, he couldn't get up anymore. Ah, Jarvis, open the mask. When? After the mask was opened, Tony pulled it off and threw it to the ground, making a knocking sound. Let me see. Robert motioned for Tony to lower his head and looked over his head. Tony, how is it bleeding? I feel like my head is split. The situation is okay. It's just a small bag. Apply ice and it should be fine. Tony, Xiao Bao, why do I feel like my head is about to explode? If you don't believe me, you can touch it. Tony, I'll try. Ah. It took a few seconds to calm down. Forget it, let's apply ice. He originally wanted to touch it tentatively, but it hurt so much at the slightest touch. Standing among a bunch of robotic arms, Tony took off his armor first, and the last robotic arm handed him a rapid-forming ice pack. After Tony applied it, he and Robert came to the laboratory. I just flew to an altitude of 40,000 feet, but the main sensor at that location was malfunctioning, and there were also some problems with the shell. Jarvis took note of it. Okay, sir. While showing off to Robert, Tony asked Jarvis to record the questions. Robert, it must be nice to fly up to that height, right? Tony, it's quite enjoyable, but it freezes easily, which may be the cause of the problems just now. Jarvis, your observation is very keen, sir. If you intend to enter space, you must improve the shell material. Gulu. Tony took a sip of the green liquid in his hand before telling him the solution. Contact Enka Company and ask them to reselect the shell material and change it to the Angel tactical satellite using gold and titanium alloy as the material. Jarvis, do you understand? Understood, sir. Do you want to display the graphics as requested? Tony, okay, take it out and let me take a look. It's best to pick some colors that I like. Jarvis, no problem, sir. The steel suit on the computer is being decorated by Jarvis, the artificial intelligence, in a color that best suits Tony's aesthetics, and finally a golden suit appears on the computer. Ha, it seems like Jarvis knows you very well, Tony. Robert stood aside and looked at the rich gold color scheme. It looked okay at first, but after looking at it for a long time, it suddenly felt very vulgar. Jarvis, isn't this color a bit too flashy? Even Tony himself felt a little inappropriate. Jarvis, it's my fault, sir. You always like to keep a low profile. I have to say that Tony's artificial intelligence is really intelligent, and it's not even a joke. Ha ha ha, I'm laughing so hard that Jarvis actually said you like to keep a low profile. Ha ha ha. I think you should stop it. Tony's face was a little uneasy, and he protested to Robert. Then an old sports car next to the computer desk attracted his attention. To be precise, it was not the sports car that attracted his attention, but the color of the car. Robert, what do you think about adding a little more red? I feel like that would be great. What do you think, Jarvis? Robert, who had been able to restrain himself from laughing, tried to keep his sentences slow, otherwise he would have to laugh again after a while, and Tony might be really angry by then. I think the aesthetics of both of you are very good. Jarvis shot 2 rainbow farts in one shot, and he matched the red color just by talking. That's it. Tony immediately fell in love with the red and gold armor and made his decision immediately. The Disney Concert Hall, with its red carpet, is brightly lit tonight and bustling with excitement. Tony Stark's 3rd annual charity ball for the Firefighter Family Foundation is being held. A piece of news on TV instantly attracted Tony's attention. Jarvis, have we received an invitation? No, sir. Well, the founder didn't receive an invitation when the dance started. This is really a joke. Tony answered Robert's words like a self-mockery, and then made up his mind instantly. If they don't invite me, I'll go by myself. This is called coming uninvited, Robert commented. I love this metaphor. Tony smiled at him, and then said to Jarvis, just the color matching just now. Jarvis, instructions received. Splicing is being started and it is estimated that it will take 5 hours to complete the assembly. Aha, no need to wait for us, dear. Robert, what we? Do you mean me? Come on, don't look at what time it is now. I have to go to bed. Don't act like this, like an old man who is about to die. You are still very young, and night is the beginning of our lives. As he spoke, Tony pulled Robert into his Audi sports car without any explanation, quickly started the car and kicked the accelerator and rushed out of the garage without slowing down. Is this the one you drove in New York? In the car, Robert was sitting in the passenger seat. The more he looked at the car, the more familiar it became. He thought carefully, wasn't this the same car that Tony drove to New York with him? Ah, yes, I sent Happy to get it. You know, his efficiency this time was beyond my expectation. Tony said to Robert while increasing the accelerator. If Harry heard this at this time, he would definitely not be able to help but say in his heart, "Can you be upset if you were about to be fired?" Thinking of this, Robert felt that Happy had his own reasons for working so hard. Thinking of the uneasy look on Happy's face that day, he couldn't be happy. Happy is a nice guy. Tony, I've always thought so. I didn't expect you to have the same view. Ha, really? Originally, he wanted to say something nice for him, but Robert might have forgotten that Happy had been with Tony much longer than him, so how could he fire him just because of one thing? After realizing that his worries were unfounded, Robert didn't speak. Part of the reason was because of what he had just said, but more of it was because. After a few minutes, Robert tried his best to hold on to the inside of the car door. He finally couldn't help but said to Tony, "I think you should know that you are walking on a road with a speed limit of 80. Looking at his speedometer, which had reached 110, Tony even had the intention to turn around and speak to Robert. "I know very well, don't worry, I always like to follow the rules." Buzz. As he said that, he filled up the gas again. If cars hadn't appeared on the road from time to time, Robert had no doubt that Tony would dare to drive above 150. In fact, it's almost the same now. Never mind. Robert let go of his hands holding the door, and he suddenly became enlightened, because the best result of an accident at this speed is to leave a whole body. "I'm a little irritable today, I don't know why." It wasn't until he entered the urban area that the speed limit was 40 and the traffic began to gather. Tony slowed down and said to Robert, who was standing beside him, "Who knows, maybe my aunt is here." Robert originally wanted to make a joke with him, but Tony didn't seem to be in much of a mood. "If I remember correctly, men don't do that," he replied weakly, then turned around and started driving seriously. But their first destination was not the charity dinner, but to change clothes. "He is my gold medal makeup artist, what do you think?" Tony, who had changed into a dress, showed off in front of Robert, and then made a gesture to the gold medal makeup artist next to him before he could react. 2 minutes later, "Makeup artist. We already know his size, Mr. Stark, and we expect to be able to tailor a suit for him next weekend, but before that, we may have to make some mistakes." Tony, "Okay, my friend, don't be in a hurry, you can do it slowly." After changing into one-size-fits-all dresses, Robert and Tony got into the car together again, taking along their old clothes as well. "Tony, I don't think you need to bring that thing. I thought you were poor at first, but it has done a lot of good things." "I've always been nostalgic." Robert ignored him, but put the clothes in his arms and hugged him. "These clothes are actually not as ugly as Tony said. They are basically everyday clothes worn by normal people." "Oh, it's up to you." Despite this, Tony rolled his eyes to show his disapproval of Robert's decision. Buzz. As the charity ball was approaching, Tony stepped on the accelerator in a very high-profile manner and became the focus of the crowd's attention almost instantly. "Oh, who is this? Doesn't he know respect? This seems to be Stark number 4. It seems to be Tony Stark's car. Is it him?" That's not surprising. The discussion between the two dinner guests actually represented the thoughts of most people. "Hello, sir, thank you." Tony and Robert got out of the car one after another, and the carboy quickly came forward to take the keys. "Oh, is this Mr. Stark?" "Yes, it's him. Can Mr. Stark join you in Zhongying?" "Who is that person next to him? Is he also a rich man?" As soon as he got out of the car and appeared in the crowd, Robert felt the feeling of being in the spotlight, the red carpet, the flash of the camera, the flattering voices of the people around him. Chapter 51. Tony, how does it feel? Excellent. I knew you'd like it. Tony held Robert's shoulder and slowly walked into the main hall, surrounded by greetings and flattery sounds. "Tony, do you remember me? We have met. Just like now, those who don't have enough status next to the red carpet can only stand outside, watching eagerly to see if anyone takes them in. Yes, I remember you, that feels good. Tony replied casually to the third-tier star who spoke, and then prepared to continue walking into the hall. What are they doing here? Robert looked at the well-dressed starlets and models emerging behind him and to the side, and asked Tony strangely. Who knows, maybe they like the cold breeze. Robert didn't say anything, just stopped and stared at his face. He was not satisfied with this explanation. Oh, okay, these people are almost all here to curry favor with Big Shot, and they will do whatever it takes to do so. I have some connection with these people, so you understand what I mean. Seeing that Robert had stopped and acted like he was going to join the group of warblers nearby without any explanation, Tony had no choice but to give the reason. Tisk, tisk, you are such a beast. Scanning the beauty group with no less than 100 people present, Robert began to hate Tony's romantic style for the first time, but there was also envy in it. I believe there are better fast food than these among my brothers, I promise. Tony patted Robert on the shoulder, and then led him forward. He reluctantly gave up on the many Yingyans outside. It was impossible for all of them to be related to Tony, but Robert didn't want to go in and find one, lest everyone be embarrassed. Our Stark company is by no means just the arms business, in fact it only accounts for a very small part of our business. I think maybe people should pay more attention to our contribution in the field of fire protection and education and... Hi, Obadia. Obadia was halfway through speaking in front of the reporters when he was interrupted by Tony, who suddenly appeared. Hey, hi, haha, look who's here. Haha, I really didn't expect that you would come. Obadia asked the reporters on the side to wait for a while, and then looked at Tony with a look of concern in his eyes, but this was just his disguise. Yeah, I didn't expect it. Has the world really changed? Treat guests without inviting the host. Tony originally wanted to blame him when he arrived, but when he saw the look in Obadiah's eyes, his tone softened a lot. Hey, listen to me, Tony, don't worry, okay. I think I've convinced the board. Obadiah's words stabilized Tony's mood a little, and he still had a certain amount of trust in his father's friend and partner during his lifetime. Tony, okay, Obadiah, very good, watch Tony for me, okay kid. As he spoke, he patted Robert's shoulder with his hand. He didn't know what to think if he knew his true age. I guess I'm fine. Robert, always tolerant of a dying man, responded to Obadiah with a smile. Don't worry, I'll leave in a minute. Tony was obviously a little disgusted with Obadiah's words and couldn't help but said angrily. After entering the hall, although the security guard at the door didn't know Robert, they didn't dare not recognize him even if Tony beat him to death. They didn't even dare to check on their boss. Okay Tony, I think it's time for our temporary group to disband. Tony, oh, what? Entering the hall, Robert found that the things inside seemed to be no worse than those outside. Knowing that Tony had not fooled him, he would not express his gratitude or anything, but instead issued a retail notice to Tony. Tony, hey, Obadia asked you to keep an eye on me before I came in. Remember? Come on. He's not mine, why should I listen to him? After speaking, Robert walked away. Tony, who insisted on keeping him for some unknown reason, was still making a last attempt. Tony, where's Belinda? Don't you just miss Belinda? Robert rolled his eyes at him. He felt as if he had heard a big joke today. A playboy was actually reminding him to stay clean. Then why do you still mess around with women when you have Pepper? Tony. Robert's words made him speechless for a moment, and Tony didn't know how to refute. Tony, that's different. After replying perfunctorily, Robert was too lazy to care about him anymore and started looking for targets on the field. Don't ever find those people here again. Tony secretly prayed in his heart that yes, he did not lie to Robert that most of the Yingyans outside had contact with him, but this does not mean that there are none in the hall, it can only be said that the number is relatively small. Mr. Stark. Just as Tony's eyes were following Robert, a voice suddenly appeared next to him calling him. Who are you? Tony turned around and saw a completely unfamiliar face. I'm Agent Coulson, from the Strategic Law Enforcement Munitions Division. Tony. Yes. I heard you guys, what do you do? The waiter on the side handed Tony a glass of wine, and he took this opportunity not to look at the agent, because in Tony's impression, agents were not very friendly. Coulson, I think we can set up a time to talk. Tony's eyes were still searching for Robert in the crowd, but suddenly he found a beautiful figure from behind whose attention was completely attracted, and he responded to Coulson's words in an extremely perfunctory manner. I think we need to make an appointment. As he said that, he walked towards the back. Coulson, what about tomorrow? Tony, next year. Okay, next year. Looking at Tony's leaving figure, Coulson sighed helplessly. He could no longer force himself on this powerful young man like he did on ordinary people. He couldn't help but look in one direction in the hall after his mission failed. You are so charming. Really, where are you referring to? Robert is holding a beauty in his arms, and the two are now standing in a corner of the dance floor dancing. Although they have never danced before, this does not prevent Robert from learning now. It's charming everywhere, for example. As he spoke, Robert's hand on others' shoulders began to move downwards, just when he was about to reach the high ground of the lower road. You can only watch there. A slender and white hand immediately stopped Robert's behavior. She didn't know what kind of move she used, which made Robert think that he couldn't move. Maybe it's not an illusion for normal people, but Robert is not very normal. His arm suddenly exerted force, leaving the tender hand that clamped him with only two choices. The first is that if she continues to stop Robert, her hand will be broken off and he will touch her up and down. Second, one is simpler, that is, the woman lets go on her own. I don't think so. Ah, the beauty in her arms let out a scream, perhaps because the sound was not loud and it was covered by the melodious song, so it was not noticeable. The woman was extremely angry now. She was ready to kick Robert in the life as soon as she kicked out, but naturally he easily dodged it. Who are you? Xian Tingruo took a step back, and Robert realized that the person in front of him was definitely not just a canary to watch. She could be called a master just by doing those two moves for Robert. Hiss. Who? The woman took a deep breath first, then resisted the urge to punch Robert to death and told him her identity. Strategic Enforcement Munitions Division, Agent, Natasha Romanoff. What the hell? Robert was confused by the name at first. Natasha Romanoff. SHIELD for short. Oh, you could have just said no earlier. Why did you say that name that no one understands? Robert said mockingly. He thought Natasha Romanoff would be angry, but at this time she actually laughed. It doesn't matter to a dying man. She smiled like a flower and said words that made Robert feel a chill down his spine, but that feeling only existed for a moment before he ignored her. What? Could it be that just because I accidentally touched an agent's butt without knowing it, I will be hunted by S.H.I.E.L.D.? Robert's nonchalant attitude was directly reflected on his face. In response to his words, there was a chill in Natasha Romanoff's eyes for a moment, but she quickly hid it because her mission as an agent always comes first. Hey, if you listen to this, maybe you won't think so anymore. Natasha Romanoff took out a mobile phone from her pocket, an old-fashioned kind with a memory card. It also had an earphone cable connected to it. She handed one of the earphones to Robert and motioned for him to take it and listen to it. What's this? Even though he said that, Robert couldn't help but put on the headphones out of curiosity. Hey, send someone to perform a first-level mission. General, where is the target and location? The target is a guy named Robert. According to the intelligence, he is extremely difficult to deal with. Send out all the people you can with heavy weapons, including machine guns and rocket launchers to ensure nothing goes wrong. Are we bringing these things to solve them remotely? But our people are better at close combat. No need to waste words. Just do whatever I tell you. I will send you the target's appearance later. He will appear on the road leading to the U.S. military base in Washington in half an hour. Send someone quickly. Yes. Beep. After the recording was played, Natasha Romanoff skillfully pulled out the memory card of the phone and broke it in front of Robert. Who is that? But Robert didn't care about this at all, but wanted to know who the person in the recording just wanted to kill him was. General Wells, the only two generals in the U.S. military. Why did he want to kill me? Natasha Romanoff, didn't you listen to what I said? Have you ever heard that two male tigers can live on the top of a mountain? What does that have to do with me? Robert was a little confused. If Burns was still a general, then General Wells did have a reason for targeting him. As the saying goes, one mountain cannot tolerate two tigers. After he showed his unparalleled strength, it was natural for him to stand on the opposite side of Wells, because he was labeled as Burns from the beginning. But now the problem is that Burns has retreated. So what other reasons does General Wells have to attack him? Seeing Robert's puzzled look, Natasha Romanoff asked him in a surprised tone. You don't really think that just an Air Force colonel and a retired general can enable you to live such a comfortable and free life now, right? What else is there? Seeing that Robert really didn't know, Natasha Romanoff felt that she needed to educate the man in front of her. General Freeman, the son of Marshal Phillip, he and General Burns helped you withstand the pressure. You don't know this. Shaking his head, Robert really didn't know that there was someone behind him helping him. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of Philip's face back then, and how much he valued and cultivated him. Even if what Admiral Freeman said is true, why should I trust you in that recording, or the shield behind you? Believe it or not, my mission is completed. Natasha Romanoff was free and easy. After saying what she said, she left without looking back, leaving Robert alone in deep thought. On the other side, Tony, who had almost experienced a passionate moment on the balcony, had just returned to the lobby when one of his old lovers came up to him. Mr. Stark, do you remember me? A very beautiful reporter asked Tony. If Tony was an unknown person, he might be happy to accept the other party's approach, but unfortunately this person was someone he had contacted before, and it was the last time before going to Afghanistan, so he had a deep memory. Oh, I really don't want to remember. The resistance shown by Tony made the female reporter who was abandoned by him after using it once think that it was a kind of fear. Of course I hope you won't remember me, because then your company will get a lot less negative news. She said quite proudly, as if she was proving to Tony that it was a mistake for him to abandon her. Well, yes, I regret it. Can I leave now? Tony wanted to leave here eagerly, because he felt that the female reporter's mental state was extremely unstable, and she might do something in the next second. This is a situation he has encountered countless times, and experience tells Tony that temporarily avoiding it is the best choice. Seeing that Tony was about to leave, the female reporter even acted as if she didn't believe her, so she couldn't help but bring out physical evidence to criticize him. Is this what you mean by being responsible? After handing Tony a bunch of photos, the female reporter began to introduce them. This town is called Gumila, have you heard of it? Tony did not answer her, but began to look at the photo in his hand. He was casual at first, but when he saw the weapons manufactured by Stark Company in the picture, he had to become serious. As more and more photos are flipped through, more and more weapons appear on them, and even the latest models appear on them. When was it taken? Female reporter. Taken yesterday. Tony turned his head and looked at her in disbelief. Obviously this answer surprised him. After being stunned for a while, Tony quickly made a decision. His eyes began to search among the crowd not far away. When he found the person he was looking for, he quickly walked over. Robert, don't be in a daze, there is something we need to deal with. Tony came up and pulled Robert out and walked out. It was obvious that the female reporter's photos and words just now gave him great stimulation. What happened? Robert also came out of his contemplation at this time. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that there seemed to be an answer to the fact that he had been making things difficult for him recently, but for a while he was not sure that he was being used by others. Some people in the company are becoming more and more blatant. Suddenly he seemed to remember something and asked Robert, by the way, what happened to the thing I asked you to investigate before? Finally Tony brought this up. Robert estimated the time in his heart and felt it was almost time, so he simply confessed to Tony. According to my investigation, the person who colluded with that group of terrorists is Obadia, but there is no physical evidence now because I haven't had time to go to his office to download the evidence. You sure? After Robert said it, Tony was questioned. After all, he was an elder who had been with him for more than 20 years. You go out and ask him what you just learned, and you'll know after seeing Obadiah's reaction. Robert shrugged his shoulders, looking confident. Then let's go. Tony took the lead, and now he couldn't wait to know the answer. Obadiah. Oh, sorry for another pause. Tony came straight to the door. Although he was disgusted by this, Obadiah decided to tolerate him for a while in order not to alert the snake. What's going on in Gumila? Isn't our arms department closed? Who can conduct arms transactions without my approval? A series of questions were thrown directly in front of Obadia by Tony, and Obadia himself was also making final efforts to stabilize the situation. Tony, don't be too naive. You know, I was really naive before. They once said that this is the bottom line and cannot be crossed. This is the way of our business. Tony interrupted without waiting for Obadia to finish speaking. This made him very unhappy, but they still had to maintain a harmonious appearance in front of everyone. Let's take pictures first and have a smile. He pulled Tony obeyed to look close to Tony in front of the camera, but behind his back he whispered in Tony's ear. Tony, do you know who doesn't let you work? Me. I submitted the ban to the board of directors. But I did it to protect you. Although Obadia almost couldn't help admitting that he was the real culprit behind all this at the end, his reason still prevailed over his anger at the last moment, resulting in the fact that in the end it sounded like he cared about Tony. How about it? Tony looked at Obadiah's back blankly. Robert came out at this time and said, maybe, you were right. Although he still didn't believe that Obadia was that person, Tony was already a little shaken at this moment. Time will prove everything. Robert said something full of metaphysics and wisdom, but Tony was obviously not the kind of person to wait for the truth to surface. Robert, the first think we have to take the initiative. Looking into the distance, Tony's eyes are now full of Ruan's anger. He will make those who betrayed him pay the due price. The small town of Gumila was originally in peace and happiness, but warlords funded by a new force are expanding their power through extremely advanced weapons. They have brought disaster to the town, which lacks humanitarianism and is condemned by the international community. Where will the future destiny of the town go? On the TV news at Tony's house, the news specially selected by Jarvis was presented to Tony and Robert. They are simply lawless. It seems it is time to teach them a lesson. Tony looked at the frequent appearance of Stark's weapons and equipment and became furious. These things were originally made by him to protect world peace, but he didn't expect that one day they would appear in the hands of terrorists. How long will it take for the Jarvis armor to be assembled? Jarvis, Mr. Stark, the steel armor was assembled 20 minutes ago and is ready for use in actual combat at any time. Then come on. Tony stood on the installation platform composed of a group of robotic arms. After changing the shell material and wearing the lustrous steel armor, he put it on. Dang dang. The sound of the armor hitting the ground sounded, and Tony stood in front of Robert and asked, how about it? It's pretty good and looks very capable. Robert gave a fair evaluation, but Tony was not satisfied. What does it mean to look like? There is no doubt about the strength it can bring. Okay, I admit it was almost. Tony originally wanted to argue and even demonstrate the power of the palm thrusters in front of Robert, but when a blue light flashed in front of him, Tony gave in. This is why he never shunned Robert when he was experimenting with steel suits, because he had more powerful power. Jarvis analyzes this energy. Jarvis. Okay sir, energy analysis is in progress. But secretly Tony still wants to know about Robert's ability, and even find a way to crack it. Jarvis. Energy analysis failed. I'm sorry, sir, I can't tell what energy it is, but what is certain is that this energy is very stable and should not have any destructive power. I believe you are the only one who has a ghost. Jarvis, I think it's time to upgrade you to a higher level, lest you report extremely dangerous things to me as safe things next time. Tony complained about his artificial intelligence in the suit. He had seen the power of Robert's blue energy with his own eyes. It was a powerful thing that could continuously pass through steel, reinforced concrete, etc. without any loss of energy. But this thing was said to be safe when it came to Jarvis, which even Tony wouldn't believe. Jarvis. Sorry sir. Okay, Tony, why are you standing here? Just go to the small town called Gumila first. Then you can send me the exact coordinates and I will be there soon. Tony. Why don't you choose to fly there with me? He asked knowingly, just like a child who always wants to be better than his friends in some aspects. I can't fly, can you provide me with a suit of armor? Robert expressed his disdain for Tony's behavior, and deliberately made a request that in his opinion Tony would not agree to. Yes, but I have to wait until I'm in a good mood. Surprisingly, Tony didn't refuse directly, but when Robert heard this, it was almost like a rejection. He simply didn't bother to pay attention to Tony anymore, and he went back to his room to sleep. I'm going to take a nap first. Contact me when you get there. He waved his hand behind him, and the next second a blue light hole appeared in front of him, leading to the guest bedroom of Tony's house on the other side. Now that he is becoming more and more proficient in mastering the power of space, Robert is too lazy to take a few more steps. When Tony saw this scene, he immediately remembered that he had been flying in the sky for such a long time, while Robert could sleep comfortably at home, and he immediately felt unbalanced. Hey, how about we go together? The blue light hole closed just as he finished speaking, and Tony didn't know where the other end led to, so now he had no choice but to fly over first. 5 hours later. Tony. Jarvis, are we there yet? Looking at the surrounding yellow sand environment, and the familiar-looking small village in front of him, Tony felt that he should have arrived. Jarvis. Yes sir, but, quote. One thing I want to remind you is that because we were flying at hypersonic speeds throughout the entire journey, the energy in the reactor may not be enough to support our return to California. Tony. I never thought about flying back. Contact Robert and send him the coordinates. Ring ring. At Tony's house, Robert, who was sleeping soundly in the guest room, was suddenly awakened by the ringing of his cell phone. This was exactly 5 hours after Tony left, and Robert had just slept for that long. He was now half awake and half confused. Hello. Maybe it was muscle memory that made him answer the phone, and Tony's voice came from the other end. Hey, did you sleep soundly, baby? But you can't sleep now. I sent you the coordinates. Ah, so fast. Robert forced himself to wake up, and then asked while checking the coordinates sent by Tony. Tony, my armor obviously didn't disappoint you, especially in terms of speed. He said it braggingly, as if it was a great thing that he could fly at supersonic speeds in human form. For ordinary people, this is indeed a great thing. It's pretty good. Beep. Robert's voice came from beside him, and at the same time, the phone call he was on just now was hung up. Tony was in the suit, looking at the blue energy that was rapidly dissipating behind him with a complicated expression. I wish I could have something like this. Robert was still a little angry when he got up, but now he couldn't help but feel funny after hearing Tony's words, and at the same time, his depression was gone. How about that? I think it would be better for you to fly in the sky. Not only was Robert no longer angry, he could even make a friendly joke with Tony. I'll leave the 3 positions over there to you. Tony hummed a few words, but he didn't think what Robert said was very funny, and now he even ignored him and started arranging tasks. So you're going to the remaining 2 spots. But those 2 places look a bit dangerous. Robert listened to Tony's heart-warming words in a somewhat rushed voice. After all, on the battlefield, is there anything more heartwarming than leaving the most dangerous things to yourself and the safer things to your friends? Dang dang. Aerospace-grade titanium alloy, ordinary bullets can't hurt me. Tony knocked on his chest and introduced Robert to the advanced materials of his armor shell. Robert wanted to say something more, but was interrupted by Tony before he could say anything. Okay, don't let mother-in-law and mother-in-law act like a woman and just decide like this. Tony didn't give Robert a chance to speak at all. His thrusters were turned on instantly and he rushed directly towards the area with the most terrorists. What I actually want to say is, hey, forget it. Robert looked at Tony, who was flying far away in the sky. In fact, he wanted to tell him that it wouldn't take much time to deal with all the terrorists. Why do you think we put our weapons here for those people to shoot? I don't know, but I heard that this is to lure back the guy who escaped last time. Lure him back. I almost died in his hands last time. What is the boss trying to do? Shish. 2 terrorists were chatting. One of them said something he shouldn't have said. The companion who was chatting with him quickly covered his mouth. If you want to die, don't hurt me. He glared hatefully at the companion who spoke so freely before letting go. What does this have to do with it? We're not here anyway. Who can hear it between the 2 of us? Obviously the reminder from his companions had no effect at all, and he still went his own way. It seems I have to stay away from this lunatic to avoid being implicated by him in the future. Looking at his disapproving companions, the slightly smarter terrorist thought to himself. He turned around and wanted to distance himself from him, but he was completely stunned by this transfer. What is that? Bo. There was a vague sound, and Robert looked at the two terrorists who had disappeared and the weapons they were guarding, and he nodded with satisfaction. What happened over there? Just now I saw a huge amount of blue light appear there. Asshole, that's where we store our weapons, go and take a look. Robert's way of solving the problem just now was quite arrogant. He directly hit that area with huge amounts of chaotic, space teleportation. Everything in the hit area was swallowed up instantly, leaving only a huge amount of potholes at the scene. If the surrounding yellow sand hadn't quickly flowed into the cave to fill it up, perhaps there would be one more unsolved mystery here in the near future. Cully and the others are gone. Weapons are gone too. It's him, this is the only one here, who are you? Several nearby terrorists noticed the anomaly and immediately surrounded them. They immediately checked to see if their companions had disappeared or stored weapons, but to no avail, and then noticed Robert standing not far away. I tell you again who you are. The leading terrorist had already picked up the weapon in his hand, questioning Robert and shooting if he disagreed with him, and the men behind him also followed suit. Ah, what are you talking about? The other party spoke the local language of Afghanistan, which Robert couldn't understand at all. Seeing these people shouting happily, he subconsciously wanted to hear what they were saying. Da. However, Robert's response was a series of bullets. Seeing that they did not understand what he was saying, the terrorists did not bother to ask any more questions and just opened fire. Oh, you are so rude. Bullets are fast, but Robert's power of space is used faster, and it fires instantly. Da. Several fire snakes swept towards Robert blankly. After seeing him suddenly covered in blue light, some of the terrorists even used grenades. 2 grenades were thrown away almost without hesitation. Arrive in front of him. Every inch of skin on the body is covered with the power of space, and now Robert has discovered a new way to use it. Boom. The sound of 2 grenades exploding sounded, and Robert had no scruples under the protection of the power of space. Because the shock wave and fragments were sent to unknown space before they hit him. 2 minutes later. What is this? Is that a person? The terrorists either ran out of ammunition or were stunned by the scene before them. What is the blue light in front of me? Is that the same person just now? This is the common thought in the minds of several terrorists now. Have you finished the fight? Robert didn't make any resistance from beginning to end. It wasn't that he couldn't use other tricks after using the power of space to cover his whole body, but that he wanted to test his newly discovered skill. Now that the enemy's attack was over, he was unscathed. This result undoubtedly satisfied Robert. Then you are of no use now. Ah, the terrorist standing at the back could barely let out a scream before he was swallowed by the space teleportation. It was not that he felt physical pain. In fact, the teleportation originally had no feeling at all. The reason for shouting may be because of the fear of the unknown. Just give these things to the aliens to play with. After dealing with the terrorists, Robert packed up all the weapons they had scattered and guarded one by one and sent them to the unknown space. That end may be the other end of the universe or it may be on the Earth, but the probability is extremely low. This next one will be a bit troublesome. Robert easily solved 3 enemy strongholds. Adhering to the principle of leaving no one or property behind, he packed them all and sent them away. But when he turned to help Tony solve the problem that was originally his responsibility, Robert found that it was not as easy as before. Because this group of terrorists is mixed with ordinary residents, it seems that they are forcing civilians to do something, and anyone who disagrees will be shot. Things are not easy to solve, but it doesn't seem that difficult. Robert murmured to himself, and then he saw his figure disappear from the place, and when he reappeared, he was already 1,000 meters away. Every man in his family must have a boy join the 10 Rings gang, otherwise he will end up like the man who was beaten to death just now. If you dare to resist, bang, Dad. The small terrorist leader who spoke in front of the villagers executed a villager who tried to resist again in front of everyone. Snort. After all, Robert arrived a step too late. He had been killed before he could stop the man. This made his mood instantly worse. He was too lazy to talk nonsense to these terrorists and just fired a few space blades. Forehead. Robert showed no mercy to anyone with a gun present. No matter which part of the body it was, as long as it was hit by the space blade, everyone would suffer a penetrating injury. A whole piece of flesh and blood disappeared directly. At first, some of the terrorists who were not hit were able to hum a few words, but that was just a flashback. After all, how could they survive when they were all bleeding profusely? Run. Ah! The villagers saw the drastic changes taking place at the scene. They thought Robert was not against them at first, and wanted to come up and thank him, but then they all turned pale with fright after seeing his brutal methods. I don't know who shouted, and the innocent civilians dispersed like frightened birds in an instant, leaving only a man and a woman at the scene, who seemed to be the wife and children of the man who had just been shot dead by the terrorist leader. Thank you. The woman did not run away like those people, but knelt down and saluted Robert with a pious look. Staggering his body position, Robert did not accept her kneeling. Although he could not understand what she said, it should be some words of thanks, which should be correct. Why? Looking at the boy standing beside his father blankly, Robert could only sigh helplessly. Benefactor, can you tell me your name? The woman raised her head as she spoke, but where was the figure of Robert who was in front of her just now? However, although no one was there, a pile of green dollars suddenly appeared on the ground. After the woman saw it, she bowed again. She knew who left it, and she had no way to repay it, so she could only express her gratitude in this way. Is it over with you? Tony looked at Robert, who suddenly came out just as he was about to destroy the weapon after finishing the battle, and asked in confusion. It has been solved a long time ago. If I hadn't seen you playing so well just now, I would have wanted to finish it quickly. While talking about Robert, he released space teleportation, and directly swallowed up the largest batch of weapons. He was too lazy to wait for Tony to set off fireworks. Jarvis. Tony used his artificial intelligence to scan in the suit, and found that just as Robert said, all the terrorists who were dissatisfied just now had been wiped out, and in some places not even the scum was left. How did you do that? Tony asked Robert in disbelief. If it weren't for the armor blocking it, his surprised expression would definitely be shown at this moment. I still have something to deal with, can you leave? But Robert was not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. He opened a space door, and looked at Tony and asked. No. Actually, you know I can fly back. As soon as he finished speaking, Robert's figure disappeared from sight. He actually left Tony where he was and left alone. Maybe you shouldn't have lost face just now. But fortunately, the battle just now was not long, and the energy in the reactor was just enough to fly back to the United States. Tony, what does it mean to save face? I really like the feeling of flying freely, okay. Listen, Jarvis, if you can't say something nice sometimes, I might consider letting you return to your original form. Jarvis was intimidated by Tony's threat, and he did not dare to show how smart he was. In the next few hours, he tried to speak as little as possible to reduce the possibility of being affected again. Jarvis, why didn't you remind me just now and just let me go back with Robert? Why did you have to let me finish what I said? You can obviously close the external outlet. He was really afraid of what he was going to get. After flying in the sky for who knows how long, Tony finally broke out, but Jarvis was the only one present, artificial intelligence, so Tony blamed him at the time. That's true of Robert, can't he wait for me for a while? Of course, Tony did not let Robert go, and his complaints about him continued throughout the rest of the trip. Jarvis could only hide in the corner and dare not speak for fear of being noticed again. Cut. Are you really sure you're fine? Keeping sneezing is not a good sign. In the director's office at the top of the SHIELD headquarters building, Nick Fury involuntarily took a few steps back as if he was afraid of being infected by Robert's sneezing. Phew, I'm fine. Picking up the paper on the table, Robert cleaned the snot from his nose and started talking about the business of coming here. Is what Natasha Romanoff told me true? Which one are you talking about? Robert's directness made Nick Fury a little confused, and he subconsciously pretended to be confused. Stop pretending. Would the SHIELD agent come and tell me this without your order? Looking at Nick, he still felt a little pretentious, but Robert made it clear. Is it true that General Wells wants to kill me? Looking directly into Nick's only remaining eyeball, Robert asked. Oh, do you have to say it so bluntly? Fury had a headache at this time. His original intention was to tell Robert that Admiral Wells was targeting him, and he also used this to imply that SHIELD and he were in the same group and were on the opposite side of Wells. But what Nick Fury didn't expect was that Robert would come directly to find out. This behavior made him look not like an old guy who had lived for decades, but like an impulsive kid. I don't have time to waste time with you, you just need to answer me now. Does Wells want to kill me, yes or no? Robert pressed forward step by step, further confirming Fury's stupid character. Yes, but even so, what can you do? The other party is a general who controls nearly half of the actual command of the US military. Robert's pressing steps made Nick Fury feel angry, so he simply gave him the answer he wanted. Fury now wants to see how strong Robert can be and how strong he can be. What's Wells' phone number? You don't want to call him to confirm whether he wants to kill you. Oh, my God, how could I meet a fool like you? Nick Fury was really shocked by Robert. He now wanted to open his head to see if it was broken inside. Maybe you can talk to me in a different way. A blue light and hole enveloped Fury, leaving only his face. Calm down. Just stay calm, okay. Nick stood there and didn't dare to move. He had seen the power of this blue light on the surveillance camera with his own eyes. Phone number, I don't want to ask myself again. Fury's answer was Robert's emotionless words. It was obvious that he was really angry now. Originally, he just wanted to live an ordinary life, but unfortunately some people insisted on messing with him, so don't blame Robert for not pretending to show off. Now the physical damage caused by hatred on his body has long been healed, and it is not an exaggeration to say that he is in peak condition. Nick Fury was sweating coldly, but he still made the call despite the threat of death, not because he was really afraid of death, but because he felt that dying for someone he also hated was simply not worth it. Ring ring. It was early morning in the Pentagon, and General Wells had just arrived in his office when his personal phone rang. He looked at the unknown caller, frowned, and then hung up. Doo-doo. Robert looked at the hung-up phone and looked at Fury with some doubts, but when his doubtful eyes fell on the other person's eyes, he felt that they were full of murderous intent. You can try calling again. Maybe Wells thinks you are making a sales call. If that doesn't work, you can try using my mobile phone. In order to gain Robert's trust, Fury specially added the last sentence, and it has to be said that the effect is remarkable. Then I'll believe you again. Robert dialed the number again, and a few seconds later. You'd better come to me if you really have something to do. If you're trying to sell some product, as long as you dare to tell me, I'll keep your factory closed tomorrow, no matter where it is in the world. As soon as he answered the phone, a low and arrogant voice came from the other end. Has this dog always been this grumpy before? Robert raised his eyebrows. What he just said was to Fury, but before Fury could respond, Wells on the other end of the phone got angry first. What did you just say? Explain to me immediately. If you can't satisfy me, be ready to report to prison tonight. Wells is a middle-aged man in his 40s. He can be a general at his age, and he is considered quite young for being a general. Originally, at his age, he had no chance of becoming an admiral, but thanks to Freeman's experience, his father, Marshal Philip, cleared many obstacles for his son. With his martial father paving the way, Freeman became a general at the age of 40. The family behind Wells also took advantage of this trend and went through many difficulties and dangers under pressure to send him there. As for why they didn't choose an old man who was highly respected in the family and more likely to be accepted by everyone to compete for this general, it was because an old general and a young and powerful one represented two completely different levels of meaning. Wells has been an admiral for many years. No matter who sees him, he usually remains respectful and even humble, but today he was actually called a dog to his face. Having held one of the highest powers in the United States for a long time, he has long lost the so-called awe. It is just a matter of words to deal with any ordinary person in this free country. Why don't you speak? You are mute. If you don't explain, my patience will be exhausted. Listening to Wells's extremely arrogant words, Robert had initially believed that this man was Wells. After all, the man who was always ready to put people in jail was incomparable to the man who was always ready to kill him. They say they are exactly the same. You are Wells, right? I heard that you wanted to kill me, so I called you now to verify. Not wanting to listen to the other party barking in his ears anymore, Robert decided to speak clearly. Quote. Who are you? Wells was just stunned and said in a normal tone, Obviously he didn't care much about someone saying that he wanted to kill someone. In fact, Wells really didn't care either. My name is Robert, and I'm asking you again if it's true that you want to send someone to kill me. Wells, Robert, it's you. Yes, I sent someone to kill you yesterday, but I don't know why you hid and found you. But so what? Do you want to go to Freeman? Are you going to file a complaint there? Baby. Not only did Wells admit it directly without hesitation, but he also ridiculed Robert, as if he was telling him that he was targeting you and what could you do? Call. The restrictions on Fury were released. When he breathed a sigh of relief, Robert asked Wells directly. Where is your current position? Wells, my position. It seems that your courage is greater than I thought, but I really want to see how bold you can be. I will meet with the president at the White House in half an hour. If you have the guts. I mean, come to the White House if you have that. Don't ever make me look down on you, crybaby. Doo-doo. After Wells finished speaking, he hung up the phone, and Robert's eyes were already filled with blazing fire. You don't really want to go to the White House, do you? Oh, listen, don't do this. Calm down, he is obviously irritating you. Fury also heard the content of Zhang Kai's phone call, and Robert did not avoid him. Fury knew what Robert wanted to do when he saw the killing intent in his eyes, and what he had to do now was to try his best to persuade him. Because if Robert really forces his way into the White House, the nature of the matter will change, which will mean that S.H.I.E.L.D. will have to intervene, and even the United States may take action. Has anyone ever told you that you talk a lot of nonsense? Robert found the sofa next to him and sat down. In the process, he said something to Fury, but this kind of warning-like words did not have much effect. Seeing that Fury wanted to say more, a blue, space power, appeared directly behind Robert. With further use and understanding of this ability, Robert has now determined the highest range he can use it. That is, when his physical body is at its fullest, he can use a huge, space teleportation that can cover half of the Earth. It doesn't take half the world, as long as it can cover the whole country. This is Robert's support. If someone doesn't want to die, he can take away everyone in the United States and bury him with him. After Fury saw the power of space behind Robert, he remembered the bad treatment he had received just now when he couldn't move, and he reluctantly chose to give up persuasion. After setting an alarm clock on his cell phone, Robert certainly wouldn't just wait there. In fact, he still had things to do. Thank you for the phone number, Fury. I hope it's best if we don't meet each other for a while, what do you think? Robert spoke to Fury in a half-threat and half-reminder, meaning that he did not want him to get involved in what was about to happen in the White House. Oh, of course, don't worry, we won't be able to see each other for a long time in the future. If I want to. Fury naturally agreed in person, and Robert did not investigate whether it was true or not, because he now had no scruples. Remember what you said, Fury. Entering the space gate, the other end leads to the Stark Company's administrative building. Fury watched Robert leave, and waited there for a few seconds until he confirmed that he had completely left. Hey, immediately mobilize all the action teams to the opposite side of the White House, and notify the president to get down to the underground command room immediately, quick. Yes, sir, Fury shouted at the other end of the phone. After making these arrangements, he was still a little worried, so he decided to go there by himself. Hello, sir, do you have an appointment? A beautiful receptionist from Stark Company asked Robert politely. Oh, there is no appointment. I am Tony's latest security consultant. I have something urgent to report to Mr. Obadia. Please tell me the location of his office. Robert said with a serious face, and he was indeed telling the truth, but the front desk would not believe his words, so she still had to call to verify. Please, wait a moment and I'll ask right away. She answered Robert politely while reporting the situation to the leader. Okay. Originally, he wanted to wait here for a while, but suddenly, Robert discovered that a map of the rooms and departments in the building was hanging on the wall not far away, and Obadiah's office was also listed. Raised his brows. I guess there's no need to bother now. Robert said something to the front desk person and walked towards the elevator regardless of whether the other person heard him clearly. Hey, supervisor, I have a person claiming to be a new security consultant who wants to find Mr. Obadia. What security consultant? Let him answer the phone and take a look. Okay. Where's the people? The front desk looked around but couldn't find Robert, but it was strange that she could find it now, because Robert had once again used an extended skill of space power, called space invisibility. I saw that all the surrounding space was distorted for a while under Robert's call, and then his figure was completely hidden. To actually enter Stark Company, you have to pass through a gate, where you need to swipe your card to enter and are guarded by security guards. After entering, you can choose to take the stairs or take the elevator up. Robert walked over in front of the security guards, and no one could detect his presence. It's not that the space invisibility used by Robert is so incredible. If these people reach out and touch it, they can still find his presence. It is possible to do something like Robert's, which is completely invisible and cannot even be touched, but that will undoubtedly require entering the empty space. It is full of dangers. If you don't pay attention, Robert may not be able to withstand it due to his physical strength. So for safety reasons, he still uses a stealth method similar to blindfolding. As Robert entered invisibly, a series of strange things happened in Stark Company. The first one to bear the brunt was that the elevator started by itself for no reason, first descending to the bottom floor, and then rising directly to the top floor. But not many people have discovered this. Squeak. The door of Obadiah's office was pushed open. Robert took a closer look to see that Obadia was not there, and walked directly towards the computer on his desk. DNEG. The sound of computer startup sounded. If anyone else was here, they might be frightened because what would appear in front of them. Can you bear it when the mouse is moving around and the chair is shaking? A normal person might feel that it is haunted at the first time. This boot speed is quite satisfactory. After waiting for more than 20 seconds to boot up, Robert felt that the speed was not worthy of Obadiah's current worth. Let me see if this thing Tony gave me works. The computer required a password to unlock it, and Robert was not going to let it go, so he directly took out the USB flash drive with the virus and inserted it into it. In a series of incomprehensible garbled codes, the computer was quickly cracked. Well, let me look for it. Robert directly looked for those encrypted items in a pile of local files. Now Obadiah's computer has been conquered by Tony's virus, so the so-called encryption has lost its effect. You told me to kill those people, but you didn't say that Tony was among them. Do you want him? It will cost extra. In the original encrypted file, Robert found a video without any surprise. Although he couldn't understand the words in it, he couldn't bear to have subtitles translated. This terrorist is quite professional in his later stages. Robert looked at the smooth subtitles, gave a thumbs up and praised the terrorist who made the video later. Beep, beep. Half an hour has passed, and Robert has copied the video just now to the USB flash drive. Beep. At this time, his cell phone suddenly rang. Robert raised it and saw that it was a photo taken by Wells in the White House. Inside the White House. Clown. What did you say, General Wells? The President of the United States asked the U.S. military general in front of him blankly. He didn't know whether the words he just said were talking about himself or someone else. Fine. Wells responded to the President of the United States by waving indifferently, with an extremely perfunctory attitude. This made the President, who was in a good mood this morning, suddenly turn bad. When he was still a presidential candidate, he was very harmonious with the general, and the two came together because of the same interests. But now that the general election is approaching, this former partner, after looking at his approval rating, decisively gave up on himself, who had long ago proposed that he wanted to be re-elected, and instead supported another member of the Democratic Party. It looks like his approval ratings are crushing his newcomers across the board. This caused a gap between them. Wells called him again early this morning and stated that he wanted to come to the White House to talk to him. I originally thought that the other party had figured it out and was ready to support him again, and the current President of the United States readily agreed. But what has he experienced? A general who only watches the time after coming here also gives perfunctory answers to his words as the President, showing no respect at all. President. General Wells, you have been here for more than 10 minutes. If you are okay, please go back first. I have other things to deal with. Seeing that the President was already interested in expelling guests, Wells no longer paid much attention to the President who was about to leave office and had little chance of being re-elected. But this is more like the White House, and the man opposite is the legitimate president of the United States after all. No matter how crazy Wells is, he would not dare to fall out with him now. Mr. President, of course I have something to talk to you about. Please watch carefully here the drama of our American hero Robert breaking into the White House. What? U.S. President Lytton was shocked by Admiral Wells' words. He subjectively did not believe that anyone would dare to break into the heavily guarded White House, but the words spoken solemnly by an admiral did not seem to be a joke. Lytton, what the hell happened? You should ask Admiral Wells about this. The sudden arrival of Admiral Freeman interrupted the conversation between the president and Wells. Lytton looked at Freeman and Nick, who followed him. Fury was very confused as to why he had not received any news about their arrival. I'm sorry, because some people restricted or blocked communication with you, so I had to use emergency interview rights to get here. When Freeman answered the president's questions, it was obvious that there was something in his words. When he said certain things to him, he stared blankly at Wells's expression and could understand who he was referring to. Admiral Wells, I think you need to explain what happened. Lytton was not stupid either, he had clearly received Freeman's hint. I also received in advance that Colonel Robert was betraying the United States and intending to attack the White House, so I took action as a last resort. Lytton, why did he? Freeman, you put. President Lytton and Freeman spoke almost at the same time, but their voices were both interrupted. By Mr. President, a suspicious person is approaching the White House. Please be prepared to enter the underground bunker to prevent any subsequent situations. The senior agent responsible for protecting the White House transmits the voice directly to the Oval Office through an emergency line. Lytton picked up the phone and was about to tell the agent that he could try talking to Robert, but Wells spoke first. You and your agents have withdrawn to protect the president. The military has arrived and they can solve everything. Seeing that the president, Freeman and others clearly had different opinions, Wells stated his reasons. If he did not force his way into the White House but chose to enter amicably, the military would never have fired first. Wells's words were reasonable and well-founded. Freeman couldn't think of any reason to refute it, so he could only hide it at the moment. At the same time, Freeman also hopes that Robert can make the right decision. After all, if his guess is correct, the army transferred by Wells is likely to be his direct heroic regiment, which is an army unit equipped with main battle tanks. Maybe I can go out and talk to him. Fury finally found a chance to speak. Just now he had been ignored and acted like an outsider. Lytton thought for a while and made an immediate decision. He picked up the phone and said to the senior agent on the other end, withdraw all peripheral agents and guards to the White House, and hand over the lawn and open space to the military control. In addition, if there is no aggressive action by the person approaching, the first shot is prohibited. I will send someone to talk to him. Yes, Lytton's order was quickly executed as soon as it was issued. At the same time, he nodded to Fury to indicate that he could go to negotiate. No matter what happened to Admiral Freeman this time, Colonel Robert went too far. If there is any conflict, he can go to court and litigate. That is the power granted to him by the Constitution. But now that he is blocking the White House like this, I think it is an insult and contempt for the highest power of the United States. When the only outsider at the scene left, President Lytton began to talk about Robert Freeman's backstage. In fact, if it weren't for this relationship, Lytton wouldn't bother to care what kind of hero he was and would either capture him or kill him directly. How could he be talking so much nonsense? Haha, the current Freeman is very lax in managing his subordinates. He doesn't dare to break into the White House. If time goes by, will he still want to steal the president? Before Freeman himself could say anything, his old rival Wells applied eye drops to Lytton. That's enough. Admiral Wells, you knew that Robert was coming, but you didn't persuade or stop him face to face. Instead, you mobilized troops around the White House without authorization. You have neglected your duty and you don't take me as the president seriously, right? Lytton is very angry now, partly because Wells gave him eye drops, but even if he is angry, he is still a politician. Freeman has promised to help him, and of course he will not be too harsh on him. But Wells is different. He not only ran away from the battlefield and took advantage of the situation, but also became more and more arrogant. Lytton felt that if he didn't hammer it hard, maybe Wells would come first before Robert came to take his position. Snort. Of course, Wells also felt Lytton's beating. He immediately expressed his dissatisfaction with a snort and said nothing. Outside the White House, Robert stood straight in front of the outer gate, while Fury was talking to him inside. It seems that you are not a person who keeps your promises. Fury had obviously said voluntarily before that he would never participate in today's incident, but he turned around and came. Can someone like this who doesn't keep his promises be a good person? I really regret revealing that news to you. I can't imagine what was in your head. Fury was holding his forehead with his hand on the fence, looking very regretful. Okay, don't delay. That thing is so loud, do you think I can't hear it? Robert got into the wrong position and without turning his head, he exposed the tank coming behind him for Fury to see. He used the most practical actions to tell the other person how normal his ears were. Okay, then you also know that right behind you are several of the US military's most advanced M1 main station tanks, which are monsters that can even crush roads. In addition, there are armored vehicles and at least one regiment of troops inside. They only need to hold on for half an hour, and several rapid reaction troops with nearly a division of troops will arrive. Robert, to be honest, I don't think there is any chance of winning in a head-on confrontation with you. Maybe you will be beaten to a pulp before those quick counterattack troops arrive. Fury's words came to an end. What he just explained was that Robert was at an absolute disadvantage at the moment, and he hoped to force him to submit and choose another option under such a strong threat of force. Finished. Robert stood there and picked his ears carelessly, as if he didn't care about what happened just now. Even though there were hundreds of guns and several muzzles aiming at the scene, he didn't panic at all. Actually, you have another way, Robert. Now go in with me and explain all this to the president. You may be punished, but that is better than losing your life. What is he still hesitating about? Come to the White House. At this time, Wells was standing behind the president in the White House, watching the real-time surveillance footage. Seeing that Robert seemed to be being persuaded by Fury, Wells decided to add fuel to the fire. Excuse me. After saying this, Wells walked directly outside without waiting for Lytton and Freeman's reaction. Freeman's reaction was that he wanted to stop him just as he was about to reach the door, but was stopped by someone. Pulled. Let him go. If this Robert is really so easily angered, it proves that he is not worthy of your respect, and it also means that he has no respect for the White House, especially for me. If that's the case, then why is he still here? It is not difficult to tell from Lytton's words that he is already dissatisfied with Robert. After all, Fury has been talking to him for so long, and if he still doesn't obey, that's obviously not giving him face, right? Don't be so stupid. If you really have the guts, come in alone. Wells walked outside the White House and could vaguely see Robert's position. He took out his cell phone and sent him a text message. Robert, stop being so stubborn. Beep. Fury's mouth was almost dry, and Robert didn't respond much. At this time, the phone rang. Where are you? I sent a text message back. Robert's body was gradually covered by blue space energy. Beep. Look here at the gate. Robert looked toward the gate inside the White House, and he quickly spotted a figure waving his hand, as if he knew he had seen him. No. Robert, don't do this. Click, click. Seeing that Robert was completely covered in blue energy and his whole body was emitting blue light, and the sound of soldiers loading their weapons who noticed something strange could be heard around him, seeing that the conflict was about to break out, Fury quickly said. Fury has one last question for you. The troops present now should all be brought in by Wells, right? Nick. Fury. Yes. Why do you ask this? A blue energy rushed straight to Fury's face, and he was swallowed by the space gate before he had time to dodge. The reason why it is called a door is because Robert set the location on the other side, which is the SHIELD headquarters. Sir, he launched an attack and seems to have killed one of our negotiators. The colonel of the Valiant Regiment reported to Wells that in fact he could serve as a division commander with his military rank, but how could an ordinary division-level unit compare to the well-armed Valiant Regiment? Then what are you waiting for? Just let him start the attack. Do you want him to hit him in front of the president before taking action? Wells said this as if he was speaking righteously, and the camera on the side captured it just right. Yes, fire immediately. After receiving the order, the leader of the heroic regiment immediately gave the order to fire on the walkie-talkie, and reporters on the side also recorded the process. General Wells, could you please tell me who the person is attacking the White House? One reporter asked the question first, and his question immediately attracted the attention of all other reporters. This is what they want to know. It's nothing inconvenient. The thugs who are trying to attack are the people who were once regarded as heroes by Americans, Robert Beatty, the legendary messenger of hell. Ah, what, shouldn't he die? As soon as Wells finished speaking, there were voices of disbelief and doubt from the reporters at the scene, because it was difficult for normal people to imagine that a person who lived 70 years ago suddenly appeared now and had the courage to attack the White House. Quiet, quiet. Wells' purpose in letting these reporters in was to ruin Robert's reputation, and it would be best if it could affect Freeman. But even if it doesn't affect Wells, he won't be at a disadvantage. After all, his decisive performance just now has been filmed, and for the last time he can build a wave of goodwill in front of the public. Robert has lived to this day for some special reasons. How to describe this? It's like a person has arrived 70 years later after sleeping. What a miracle. Incredible. I've already thought about what the headlines will be tomorrow. It's going to be a big hit. The reporters' enthusiasm was ignited, and Wells was very satisfied with this, so he immediately prepared to casually talk about the generous treatment Freeman gave him after Robert woke up. In fact, Robert's treatment after he woke up was not low. Our Admiral Freeman even applied for a villa and a subsidy of $10 million for him, but I didn't expect that he was not satisfied yet. He pretended to be disappointed, and the reporters quickly asked the cameraman to take pictures, but such a solemn performance was interrupted. Sir, our attacks are ineffective against him, he is coming towards you. The leader of the heroic regiment shouted on the intercom. When Wells finished listening, he wanted to run, but it was too late because a man with a blue light all over his body was already standing in front of him. Continue. Why don't you say anything? Robert looked at Wells leisurely, and for a moment he had no intention of taking action. Ah, shit, run, quick shot. Robert's sudden appearance immediately frightened many reporters. After all, his current identity is a thug attacking the White House, and he also carries such a weird behavior that would scare even an individual, but there are some brave guys among them. Excuse me, can you please let Admiral Wells and I have a chat alone? After a large space gate hits, the only place where Robert can properly deal with these people is Times Square. After all, they can't be sent to Tony's house or the desert of Afghanistan, right? The former is not a dangerous place for men and unattractive women, but the latter desert doesn't care who you are. Ah, where's my camera? My notebook is also gone, my handwritten notes are still on it. Suddenly there was a group of people in Times Square. They were running around in circles trying to find something, but it was in vain because Robert had left those things where they were. He was not stupid, and it was not that he had failed to plan after dealing with Wells. As the saying goes, a tree lives on its bark and a person lives on its face. Robert still didn't want some of his negative things to leak out and be known to others. He didn't know what Wells said before he came, but it was right to leave those things for recording. Are you very arrogant? When Robert was taking the time to send the reporters away, Wells had every possibility of escaping into the White House, but he chose to point a pistol at Robert's head. I bet you don't have bullets in your gun. Oh, I don't know whether to live or die. Bang bang bang. After saying this, Wells immediately pulled the trigger. A successful smile was about to appear on his face, but he quickly froze because something beyond his knowledge happened before his eyes. Snapped. After knocking Wells's pistol off with a slap, Robert looked at him who still had a stiff expression and couldn't help asking in a funny way. Didn't your people tell you that I'm not afraid of this? Stay away from the general. Stop it, Robert. Two shouts came from two different directions. On one side was Freeman in the White House, and on the other side was the leader of the heroic regiment. Da, da, da. The sound of dense footsteps sounded. Even though they had tried to no avail, the soldiers and agents surrounding Robert still subconsciously aimed their guns at him. Robert, you can't kill him. Freeman walked out of the agents and guards and came directly to Robert. As for the president, he had already hid in the underground command room, and Freeman was unwilling to think about it before trying to persuade Robert. Ha, why, he can kill me, but I can't kill him. Robert was so angry that he laughed. If he hadn't guessed that the person opposite was probably Admiral Freeman, who had helped him behind the scenes many times, he might have dealt with it if it had been someone else. Robert, I am Freeman. My father Philip once knew you, so please believe me, okay? There is still room for redemption in this matter. Freeman looked at Robert sincerely. He was not lying. Judging from the current situation, the situation can still be saved by paying some price. Sorry, General. Robert looked at him and remembered how Philip promoted him in the past and that their family was very kind to him. But things can't be good today. No, a blue light hole appeared under Freeman's feet. Because there were many people at the scene, Robert did not choose to condense the space gate in his hand and then throw it out. Instead, he opened the door on the ground in a hurry. Due to gravity, it is almost impossible for humans without wings to escape. He killed General Freeman and opened fire. Upon seeing this, the leader of the heroic regiment quickly issued the order to fire. As he spoke, he intentionally or unintentionally moved towards Wells, who was quietly escaping, and tried to block him. Countless bullets slanted towards Robert's outer layer of protection. It couldn't be said to be scratching, because those things didn't hit him at all. Asshole. Fake. How can we fight this? The useless output again made many American soldiers give up the attack. Some of them were so angry that they threw their empty rifles on the ground and took out cold weapons to subdue Robert. Rumble. The M1 main station tank also stepped onto the lawn of the White House at this time. It pointed its muzzle at Robert. Even though it had already tried that, the shells could not hurt him at all, it still aimed at him. Leave before I get angry. Perhaps it was because they did not take action from the beginning to the end that these American soldiers swelled. After Robert finished speaking, they not only refused to retreat, but even rushed up to hit him with cold weapons. Surrounded by American soldiers who wanted to attack him, Robert couldn't help it, especially when he saw Wells about to run into the White House. He completely exploded. Humph, I'm giving you face. I saw that the space around Robert as the center began to distort, and eventually even cracks were torn out. Those closest to him who wanted to attack first had the best luck with missing arms and legs. Ghost. Bang, a gunshot sounded. Shut up and stay in formation. The strong smell of blood instantly filled the air, and a blood river had begun to take shape on the lawn of the White House. However, the heroic regiment is worthy of being the elite of the U.S. military. When faced with such a terrifying scene, only one or two people panicked. After the leader of the regiment killed a screaming one, they actually reorganized their formation. Wells, please don't leave. I have something to say to you later. Robert looked at the army in front of him and saw that Wells had entered the White House door. Under the shield condensed by the power of space, a playful smile appeared on the corner of Robert's mouth. I saw him snap his fingers in front of everyone, and Wells quickly stepped back, visible to the naked eye. Snapping your fingers has no effect, your handsomeness is over. If someone approaches Wells' position at this time, they will immediately find that the space there has become very viscous, and it actually feels like the space has turned into water, and Wells was pushed back by this current. Protect the general. I've seen you unhappy for a long time. The leader of the heroic group still wanted to struggle, but Robert didn't tolerate him, so he just waved his hand and his head disappeared. This scene frightened all the soldiers of the brave regiment present. Seeing that the commander was killed in this way, why bother to fight? The U.S. military began to flee on a large scale, and even the tanks were gradually retreating, forming a huge amount of range around Robert as the center that no one dared to approach. This is exactly what Robert wants to achieve. He just wants to use some bloody methods in the early stage to avoid more terrifying killings in the later stage. After all, he was not a sadist. If Wells had not thought of killing him and had taken action, how could today's scene have happened? After killing some radicals and die-hard U.S. troops, Robert finally had a short period of leisure. Tell me, why do you want to kill me? Robert canceled the space flow, acting on Wells, and once again unlocked a method of using energy. He was in a happy mood. Robert didn't mind chatting with the general when he had absolute control over the field. Let me go, I beg you. Little did he know that this was the first thing Wells said as soon as he got out of trouble. Robert looked at him with some disappointment. At this time, the general's face still had the arrogance from the beginning. Kneeling in front of Robert, Wells had a pair of eyes full of fear on his face full of tears. Please let me go. I have made many contributions to the United States, and my children are still in high school. Ah. Just as Wells was halfway through his begging words, Robert had already opened a chaos door under him. The name he just named meant that the other side of the door was full of chaos. Robert, you disappoint me. Standing alone on the lawn of the White House, the place that was originally green was now stained with a layer of blood. After a while, whether it was the president suddenly speaking through the camera microphone, or the increasing number of armed helicopters overhead, or even the fighter jets flying over from time to time, it was clear that a large amount of support was coming. Mr. President, I want to talk to you. Looking at a camera casually, Robert knew that the President of the United States in the underground command room could see and hear what he said, otherwise he would not have said that he was disappointed with himself just now. Don't even think about it. You killed 2 generals of our country. This is an act of naked treason. A division of regular troops will arrive soon. If they can't kill you, I may even consider using nuclear bombs. The president's speech resounded in the White House. It was a righteous speech, as if there were countless people around him. At this time, U.S. President Lyndon was actually pale with fright in the underground command room, and his forehead, which was covered in cold sweat, was still being wiped by himself. To be honest, Robert's combat power was simply beyond his imagination. If he had known earlier, Lyndon would have tried his best to defeat Wells without letting him offend Robert. But it's too late to say anything now. The U.S. military suddenly lost 2 generals. The White House, where the supreme leader of the United States lives and works, was once again stained with blood after 1814. The nature of the matter has changed. Even if Lyndon feels threatened and wants to save his life, almost all politicians and military forces in the United States will not agree, so now he can only bite the bullet and pretend to be tough. For this reason, he even said that if he used a nuclear bomb to detonate a nuclear bomb in Washington, he would die with Robert. Now the U.S. president needs a step and a reason to step down, but this reason is not easy to find. Fortunately, this is what Robert does professionally, and he is best at passing ladders. Admiral Freeman is not dead. If you don't believe me, you can call him. Besides, my goal has been achieved and there is no need to continue calling. HMPH. Even if General Freeman survives, you can't escape the thunderous punishment. You, Robert, must pay the price for today's actions. Lyndon was actually happy to stop the conflict with Robert. After all, he was at the center of the battle, even though he was protected by a fortress deep underground. But it would be false to say that he is not afraid. Judging from the combat power Robert has shown, he may really be able to fight all the way to the ground. However, even if he had the intention to negotiate, Lyndon did not dare to take action, because almost every minute he received calls from local states, military, and federal congressmen, and their words expressed only one meaning: fight to the death. Quote exclamation mark. How could Lyndon stop? Look at the sky. I think you'll change your mind soon, Mr. President. After saying this, Robert stopped talking. He had great confidence in protecting himself. If anyone doesn't believe it, just look at the sky. The originally dazzling sunlight was blocked by a wall of blue light, but now it can be seen all over the United States, even on its borders with neighboring countries. If someone stands in space now, he can more intuitively discover that the entire territory of the United States has been covered with blue energy, which would make people involuntarily awe like the power of the gods. What is that? What's wrong with the sky today? Why is there such a strong light in the sky? People all over the United States have seen strange blue lights in the sky. They cannot understand the situation and are driven by curiosity to go out of their companies or homes to check it out. The president's phone in the White House safe room was almost buzzing with calls. The first one was the Weather Bureau's report of abnormal weather. Then the military called and said that the disappearance of many high-orbit satellite signals was suspected to be caused by blue light in space. What on earth did you do? What is this thing in the sky? What does it have to do with you? The president roared through the surveillance camera and asked Robert that he was indeed the one who made the thing in the sky, and he paid a lot for it. From the small wounds that constantly appeared on his body, they healed quickly and then tore again. Over and over again, you can get a glimpse of it and see the whole picture. Maybe you can talk to me in a different tone. The pain in his body made Robert uncomfortable. He was not in a good mood now, and it got even worse after being yelled at by Lyton. What do you want to do? Bang! Lyton, who was directly pulled up from the ground by Robert using the power of space, seemed to be in shock. He was thrown to the ground before he understood what happened. Your tone is pretty good now. Robert gave Lyton a smile, but because it was under protection, others could not see it. What ordinary people could see with the naked eye was only a man standing there emitting blue light. How dare you do this? I am the President of the United States. Lyton had come to his senses at this time. He immediately stood up and straightened his clothes. Although he was afraid, his dignity as a leader prevented him from showing it. That thing can kill us all. If you don't believe it, just send your people to try it. From now on I will push it down at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Before the United States is destroyed, I hope you and the politicians behind you can give me a satisfactory answer. Seeing that the president was pretending to be strong but his trembling legs undoubtedly betrayed him, Robert didn't care about what he just said. For such face-conscious people, if you want them to bow to someone openly, unless they are prepared to be entangled or to completely kill the other party, it is better not to push them too hard. Robert explained to Lyton in a calm tone. He no longer acted like the president. He forcibly controlled his trembling legs, wiped the cold sweat from his face, walked aside and started to make a phone call. On the other side, Tony, who had just flown back to the United States, was also stunned by the scene in front of him. Oh my God, can anyone tell me what's going on? The figure that stopped advancing, Tony was hovering in the air wearing a steel suit, looking at the endless blue energy in the sky in front of him, and asked in shock. Jarvis, sir, according to analysis, the possibility of what you see in front of you is not a natural phenomenon is as high as 99%. Tony, you don't need to analyze this. I can analyze what you said with my naked eyes. What I want to know is what the blue energy is in the sky or space. Is it dangerous? Okay sir. Jarvis, an artificial intelligence, can sometimes feel embarrassed. 1 minute later. Sir, the analysis is complete. The energy in the sky is highly consistent with the one used by Mr. Robert, and the similarity is 100%. Robert, what is he doing? Does he want to destroy the world? Tony was shocked in the armor. He knew how powerful Robert was, but he never thought that a person could do it to this extent. Is that still a human being? Sir, correct me, it may not be the world. What Mr. Robert wants to destroy is just the United States. As Jarvis spoke, he played various news and personal videos in front of Tony. From them, it was clear that this was present in every place in the United States, and that the skies in other countries further away were still normal. Tony, does it make a difference? In his subconscious, the United States represents the whole world, which is understandable. After all, Tony is a Native American. I'm not sure there's a difference, sir. But one thing I want to say is that if you can't persuade Mr. Robert to stop, the best choice is to flee the United States as soon as possible, because that thing is falling at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Oh, my God, call Robert. At the same time, various U.S. agencies also came to the same conclusion as Jarvis, whether it is the Weather Bureau, the Air Force, the space station, they all came to the conclusion that if the blue energy is not stopped, the United States will be destroyed. When Lyton got the news on the phone, he was not nervous at first but relieved, because now he had a reason to go down the stairs. Protect the president. When Lyton was about to talk to Robert, a group of people rushed out from the White House. They were the guards and agents who had just protected him in the underground command room. Robert did not bring them up with him. No, put down your guns. At the same time, lift the state of emergency in the White House and let the troops who came for reinforcements return the same way they came. Seeing that the people who came up wanted to attack Robert, Lyton hurriedly stopped him. His last few phone calls had already reached a consensus with the top families and forces in the United States, that is, the entire United States could not be ruined for a Wells. Countries built by capital often only look at interests and not emotions. When Robert was able to challenge the entire powerful class and killed one of their representative figures, Wells, he was naturally surrounded by all these people. But when Robert proved that he really had the strength to eliminate these classes, they who were angry just now had a different look. I desperately want to make peace with him to prevent Robert from losing control and destroying the United States. This also corresponds to the famous international saying, when others falsely accuse you of having weapons of mass destruction, you better have them. When Robert's trump card that could destroy the entire country was thrown out, the whole world was clean. In only half an hour, the White House was cleaned up by the troops that just arrived. And the people who were called thugs and traitors just now were sitting leisurely in the presidential office drinking coffee. At this time, a phone call happened to come, and the caller ID was Belinda. "Robert, are you okay? Did you look at the sky just now? Some people analyze that it was a precursor to a major earthquake. They already have many people who want to flee the United States. Do we want to leave too?" Belinda is standing by the window now, talking on the phone and browsing information on the internet. Those people are talking about big earthquakes, giant tsunamis, destruction of the earth, super tornadoes. The more she looked, the more frightened she became. A feeling of panic spread online. Belinda had wanted to contact Robert for a long time, but his phone had been on the line until just now. "It's okay, baby Belinda. The government has made an announcement. Didn't you see it? It's a great experiment by Mr. Tony Stark of our country. It will completely change our lives." Belinda: "Ah, really? Yes. So don't worry unfoundedly. Drawing a clear line with those delusional fools on the internet is your best choice now." Belinda: "Oh, okay then. Okay, honey, if there's nothing else, I'll have to hang up. I have something to do." Okay, wait. Are you coming tonight?" Belinda, who was stunned by Robert's deception, half-heartedly believed what he said, but when she hung up the phone, she asked a question that made Robert excited. "Are you well rested?" He thought that Belinda had recovered and could fight again. At this time, Robert could not wait to appear in front of her right away, but imagination is often beautiful in reality. Belinda: "No. I just miss you. It's not that I don't want to. I came recently." Robert, who had asked his little brother to move in vain, instantly lost his energy. Finally, he comforted Belinda for a while and then hung up the phone with some regret. "You should try to focus on the internet. Haven't you seen what a mess it has become?" Robert shouted to the other end of the president's office. Perhaps because of what happened just now, his words were a little rude, but those on the opposite side, including the president and other senior government officials, did not dare to say anything. Because when they gathered together to summarize the intelligence, they all broke into a cold sweat. Just now, they and the entire United States were on the road to hell. They were naturally very restrained towards the initiator of all this. After all, no one wanted to do it again. "Okay, we'll have someone issue an announcement to refute the rumors, but that will only treat the symptoms, not the root cause. We may have to wait until Tony Stark holds a press conference to solve the problem." "Yes, if you can demonstrate that situation again, then it will undoubtedly be more convincing. If it's convenient for you." These all-American big shots stopped putting on airs in front of Robert. Not only did they talk to him in a gentle voice, but they didn't seem to force him to give a demonstration. There's no need to test it. It'll be fine if that thing comes back tens of thousands of times." Robert found it very boring to stay with these old foxes. They couldn't tell which words contained a hint of temptation. If they were not strong enough, they would probably be attacked immediately. But this is bound to never happen to Robert, because he has absolute strength. Yes. After hearing Robert say that they could do it again, those people quickly put their thoughts away. Ring, ring, ring. The phone rang, and Robert raised it to see that it was Tony calling. In fact, he had just called Tony not long ago, and they were still on the lawn of the White House. Not long ago. "Hello, Tony." "Robert, why are you crazy? Are you ready to destroy the whole world?" Standing on the lawn, as soon as Robert answered the phone, he was startled by Tony's yelling and took the phone away. He didn't hold the phone to his ear again until the sound gradually became quieter. "Speak, Robert, you're not dead yet, are you? Listen to my explanation, Tony." For Tony Stark, Robert regarded him as a friend, so he was not angry, but patiently explained the reason. "You were chased by an admiral, and you ended up killing him." After hearing Robert's words, Tony felt incredible, but thinking about it again, it seemed that it was not impossible for him to engage in such a big posture. "Tony, then your intention is not to destroy the United States, but to protect yourself." Very smart kid, congratulations on getting the answer right. After a moment of silence, as if he was thinking about something, it only took a few seconds for Tony's expression to change from struggling to firm. I support you. Although I love this country very much, if this is your only way to protect yourself, I choose to support you, Robert. Ha ha ha. I love hearing this. Tony's statement undoubtedly made Robert very happy. This was also the first time he heard other people's approval since this action. I'm sorry to bother you, Colonel Robert. We have a problem. How should we explain the blue energy in the sky to the people? Robert was on the phone with Tony, and Lytton came over to ask. He was really forced to do nothing, mainly because if he didn't explain the phenomenon just now and stabilize the situation, there would probably be a wave of panic-induced escapes in the United States. The first ones to run away are undoubtedly the rich and tycoons. Their escape will undoubtedly take a large amount of the country's wealth with them. Undoubtedly, the sooner this issue is explained, the better. How do I know how to explain it? Aren't you the best at making up stories? Why don't you just make one up now? Robert stood aside with a completely indifferent attitude. After all, he didn't care what happened to the United States. Explain what? Tony asked on the other end of the phone, but Robert's eyes suddenly lit up. By the way, Tony, you can take the blame for this achievement. What pot an achievement? Robert, what are you talking about? Robert suddenly had an idea when he heard Tony's voice, so he talked to Tony in front of US President Lytton. You go home and immediately prepare a very bluffing device. Just say that you made the blue light that covered the United States just now. By the way, you can also lead the public's thinking to our previous agreement. Then Stark's stock price will not rise. It's skyrocketing. The agreement that Robert mentioned was that Tony would study his power of space and apply it to life through science and technology. If this can be realized, it will undoubtedly be an epic progress for mankind. Wait a minute, Robert, I'm a little dizzy. Are you saying you want me to be in the limelight? Wouldn't that be good? Tony was actually laughing so hard at this moment. After all, he didn't lack money and power at all. What did he lack? Name. That's of no use to me. It's better for you to do it, Tony. That's more in line with your personality. Robert said nonchalantly, and Tony immediately agreed without hesitation. He is the best at pretending to do this kind of thing. Tony, is there anything else? Robert, if not, I'll be home right away and get ready. Believe me, I'll definitely come up with something big this time to attract eyeballs. Well, I believe you, Tony, but there is one more thing you should not worry about first. Well, how can I tell you? Tony, what? Is it about the stray arms? Not only that, but the people behind the scenes who kidnapped you in Afghanistan have also been found out. Tony. Who? Obadia. Robert said the name truthfully, and Tony was silent as expected. Tony. If there is evidence, maybe I have evidence, Tony, it's him. All the evidence is stored in Obadiah's computer. I will send it to you, Tony, later. Good. Do. The phone was hung up. Robert looked at the President of the United States and said to him. Someone dares to use overseas organizations to kill Americans. I think as the President, you should be angry about this, right? Lytton, who had listened to the whole story, certainly knew what was going on. At this time, he was no longer as proud as before. Now it would be no exaggeration to say that he is approachable. Lytton, I heard it, Colonel Robert, Obadia, right. I will send someone to arrest him immediately. Well, okay, now let's talk about how to write a story. Lytton, no problem. Robert is really right. Making up stories is really his strength, especially in deceiving the public. Robert was lying comfortably on the sofa in the president's office of the White House, not far away from those American dignitaries. Is it okay if you discuss it for a long time? Who will pay for it? Robert had already picked up the mobile phone in his hand. All his savings of more than 100 million were used to buy shares of Stark Company. However, he was not satisfied and wanted to borrow some money from the government. After all, this was a sure profit business. Colonel Robert, we have discussed it. The Ministry of Finance will lend you this money. Is 1 billion enough? In the end, Lytton pushed the Treasury Secretary out to give the money, but Robert was obviously not very satisfied with this. Bang! You are sending people to beg for food. If you give me 1 billion directly, it will not be considered as a loan. It will be regarded as the government compensation for my mental losses. The Minister of Finance and Finance felt that the nature of the businessman made him want to bargain, but Robert interrupted him directly. In addition, you have to lend me 5 billion. This is considered a loan. I will pay it back when I make money. That's it. With a wave of his hand, the finance minister involuntarily returned to the team just now. At this time, Robert showed almost magical power to suppress these old foxes. All right. The Minister of Finance only agreed after getting secret nods from the people around him. There was no way they could do it. They were really afraid that Robert would go crazy and kill them all. Compared with this money, it was nothing. That's right. After getting an answer that satisfied him, Robert stopped making trouble. After all, if the politicians who were composed of capitalists did not dare to offend him openly, they could not guarantee that they would not resort to such dirty means as poisoning. Robert's health has always been a weakness. The reason why he had to kill Wells before was entirely because he was frightened by the secret covetousness of a U.S. military general. If he just got some strong poison, he might kill Robert. Okay, Colonel Robert, the money has been transferred to you. Kindness. In the White House office, Robert concentrated on buying stocks, while those old foxes hid outside the door and whispered. He's really gone too far. He's so blatant, and he doesn't take the president of the country seriously. A radical expressed his opinion indignantly, but President Lytton, who was forced into it, was not happy. Why didn't you say it in front of Robert in there just now? Forehead. One sentence made the man mute. He actually had the intention of secretly venting his anger. After all, these high-ranking officials who were accustomed to being pampered would not give in easily before seeing the terrifying strength with their own eyes. Although this radical faction was suppressed, some people were still unconvinced because they had not seen it with their own eyes. Okay, stop testing each other. Robert's strength is undoubted. He will demonstrate this to himself in a moment. If any of you don't like him, please declare war with him in the name of your own family, and never involve the United States again. Lytton saw that there were still people who did not know how to live or die, so he simply separated their interests from the United States. He wanted to see if these people would have the courage after this. Then let's wait until he shows off his strength again before making any plans. Don't touch him before that, but if he can't perform or becomes much weaker after a while. An old man with a cane slowly walked out of the crowd and stood in front of Lytton. He seemed to have a very high status and gave way to everyone he passed. Although he didn't finish what he said, judging from the murderous look at the scene, his meaning was self-evident. Half an hour later, the lawn of the White House was thoroughly cleaned, and with the efforts of one division, the traces of the previous battle were almost completely covered up. As I said, this matter is completely an experiment by our great scientist Mr. Tony Stark. This is a progress that spans the times. Now let us invite Tony to the stage to answer people's doubts. Welcome. At the President's order, all the reporters present burst into warm applause. At this time, the American power class has temporarily put aside their previous differences and stood on the same front, so today neither CNN nor other media dared to speak against it. Thank you, my friends. Tony stepped onto the podium of the White House press conference under countless spotlights. This live broadcast to the whole country and even half of the world undoubtedly made him very comfortable. Tony was in a good mood and made up stories more smoothly. As I just said, we combine Ni energy and V energy based on the theory of fee and ceremony, and then a highly professional lie was compiled and successfully convinced some Americans, but a large number of people still remain skeptical. In order to reach a wider audience, the White House specially launched an online live broadcast of this press conference. Now almost a large number of netizens are questioning Tony's words. What nonsense are you talking about? I don't understand. I feel like the government is looking for a scientist to fool us. Maybe the United States is really going to be destroyed. Haven't you seen that many officials in the White House are missing? Yes, I discovered it too. Maybe they have already escaped. I'm going to book a flight now. There is almost a voice of doubt on the internet, which also reflects the attitude of most Americans. Due to the long-term struggle between the two parties in the United States, the media controlled by both parties sometimes even publish fake news in order to slander the other party. Some fake news has been exposed and sparked public outrage, requiring the government to clean up the mess. This has led to the US government's credibility in front of ordinary people being continuously eroded, so much so that not many people believe what it says at a press conference. If it were a big Eastern country, it would only require an announcement from the government to convince most people, but the United States cannot do that. I still have to take action. Watching the live broadcast without delay, Robert was hiding behind the scenes. He didn't want to show his face in public. Okay, bring the things up. After Tony said something on the stage that both professionals and unprofessionals couldn't understand, he finally invited today's protagonist. Everyone, let me introduce to you Stark's latest product, the Space Controller. Its simplest and most understandable function is to allow goods from the West Coast to reach the East Coast in an instant. Next, Tony began to speak human language, and everyone was attracted by the pie he drew, and all looked sideways at the device that was brought up. This thing Tony prepared is quite handsome. What was brought up was a spherical shape that was 2 people high. Its whole body was emitting blue light, and there were some mysterious outline patterns engraved around it, some of which were like those on a chip design, and some of which were like runes in fairy tales. This thing is definitely not the biggest, but it is very handsome in terms of coolness. I have to say that if Tony didn't use his favorite bold colors such as gold and red everywhere, the things he designed would still be quite good looking. Then let's start demonstrating Stark's epic-making product. Tony walked to the side of the spherical object and turned on a button similar to a switch. Suddenly, the blue light suddenly skyrocketed. It looks very intimidating, but in fact it is just a few very bright lights hidden inside. Okay, now let me show you its basic usage. Tony hid the hand that had just touched the ball behind his back, because the paint had not yet dried due to the rush of preparation, but even so, he carried out the plan without hesitation. Bang! The big bright blue ball shoots a beam of light towards the ground, and then shoots another beam not far away. 2 space gates appear in people's eyes immediately. Oh, incredible. It's a miracle. Shit, this is all science. Mr. Stark will definitely go down in the history of the United States and be worshipped by countless people. The scene instantly erupted with exclamations and praises from reporters, and the joy on Tony's face grew stronger with the click sound of taking pictures. This is nothing, now let me show you its real use. Speaking with a smile on his face, Tony walked into the nearest space door. Wow, Stark, American star, world glory. The shouts one after another are the voices of reporters on the scene and people online or in front of the TV. Now they have even believed the explanation of the government or Tony. Why? Because after Tony stepped into the space door, next to him, his figure walked out of another door more than 10 meters away. What American star? This must be from synthesis. You don't want others to be better than you, do you? Come on, synthesize one for me. Don't tell me what you said above. It's really possible that it was synthesized. After all, the government of the flat earth has the ability to make it round. Most people have believed the US government's explanation, but there are still some people with fanciful or conspiracy theories who are still unwilling to believe it. At this time, the trustees arranged by the government have to perform. Excuse me, Mr. Stark, can you still perform the Blu-ray that covered the United States? When he asked the question, almost everyone looked at Tony. The public and the uninformed people were looking at him, but the informed ones were looking at Robert behind him. Promise him. Robert's voice sounded from Tony's hidden earphones. This was planned and nothing worth hesitating about. Tony, of course no problem. But the consumption was huge. The previous time I consumed the energy stored by Stark Industries for 10 years. If it happens again now, the entire Washington may be without power for several days or a week. Tony took great pains to prove the rationality, and he never forgot the law of conservation of energy. Then let's start now. Tony turned on the switches on the 10 balls one by one, and they suddenly emitted more intense light, gathered at a point, and then shot towards the sky. Oh my goodness, this is real. Where's that idiot who just said the earth is flat? Come out and walk around twice. Let's see what kind of idiot would believe this argument. Stark did prove that he did this, but it has nothing to do with the flat earth theory. I am also a supporter of the flat earth theory, and I believed Tony's words just now. Obviously there is no connection between the two. It doesn't matter, the Earth is round. What evidence do you have? Have you ever been to space to see it yourself? Things on the internet are so wonderful. Originally, everyone was paying attention to one thing, but maybe because of some people's words, everyone would be led astray and start arguing with each other. What are you arguing about? It's serious to buy Stark stocks. At this time, a netizen who did not want to reveal his name silently sent a message, which made many people instantly think about what the top priority was. Thanks for the reminder, I'll buy it now. I am coming too. Go and have a look at Stark stock, it's going up like crazy. Are you not crazy? You are all grabbing it, leaving some for me. Robert, who silently brought the topic back to the right track, was in trouble, hiding his merit and fame. Robert, how long do I have to stay in this position? Tony's voice came from the headset, and Robert remembered that he should have collected the power of space from the sky 10 minutes ago, but he was so absorbed in looking at his phone that he forgot. Oh, right now. As soon as Robert's energy was withdrawn, the power of space in the sky disappeared instantly. Tony finally ended the action he had planned to use to show off at the beginning. Unexpectedly, Robert was 10 minutes slower than expected, causing the scene to become awkward. Embarrassing. Good. Pa bang bang. I don't know who took the lead. Warm applause erupted at the press conference. The reporters in the audience were all happy about the progress of their country, but a group of people swallowed subconsciously. Gudong. How strong is this Robert? The result of the demonstration just now came out. Now Litton's hand is within the scope of the blue energy. It is still all over the United States, and it is still so unsolvable, but it lasts as long as 15 minutes. It seems that he is really not someone who can be easily offended. Why, at this time, no matter which faction the American senior officials were, they were completely convinced. They no longer had the idea of punishing Robert, but instead began to think about how to win over him. HMPH. Wells went too far. He almost caused the United States to lose such an important figure because of his willful behavior. Quote. Yes, he and his family must pay the price for this. That's right. Some high-level officials immediately took action. Now that everyone has chosen Robert, Wells, or, to be more precise, his family must be liquidated. After all, the cake is only so big. If one person is to serve the table, some people must go down. Freeman, as a high-ranking military official, was certainly one of these people. He saw people who were allies with Wells in the past immediately defecting, and felt the cruelty of politics again in his heart. Well, the game is over, go home and sleep. Robert was not very clear about what the top officials of the US government were talking about outside, and he didn't care, because he always believed that these people could make the wisest choice after seeing absolute strength. It's you. Suddenly, just as Robert was about to leisurely step into the space door, in front of him, a low groan sounded in his ears. Who? As soon as he asked the question, the space in front of him became chaotic, the office began to rotate, and Robert began to feel that the original ground turned into the sky, and the sky turned into the wall. Snort. Robert had already guessed who the visitor was, and he immediately did not dare to neglect him. Knowing that his body was a weak point, he did not choose to use his physical body to fight off the abomination, but chose to use a ball of space power to hold himself tightly wrapped. It's really you. The surrounding space returned to normal. Robert had just transformed into a little blue man, and the person who had just taken action appeared. Ancient One, you know me. A female bald head is quite recognizable, and with this move, Robert can't admit his mistake. Of course I know you. As he spoke, he launched an attack without warning. The power of space was driven to the extreme by him, and the surrounding space immediately responded and turned into energy to press towards the Ancient One. Robert, on the other hand, rushed straight towards Ancient One at extremely fast speed, and touched an eye-mounted object on her chest. Everything happened so fast that the Ancient One who originally stopped his attack was caught off guard. Coupled with Robert's extreme speed using the power of space, he successfully succeeded with no resistance and only help. Beep. Available ability detected. Time Eternity. The owner can be eternal in time, coexist with time, one of the top powers in the universe. Do you want to get time eternal? A roar sounded after Robert immediately agreed, and the Ancient One's face was filled with shock and anger. How dare you covet it? As she said this, she couldn't help but prepare to settle the score with Robert. Ancient One had the strength. If she had been more serious just now, this situation would not have happened. Let's talk some other time. Robert never thought of confronting her. He had actually succeeded in that moment. In fact, touching the time stone was a bloody gain. If he couldn't touch it, it wouldn't be a loss. He could just run away immediately. The Ancient One couldn't catch up with him anyway. The Ancient One watched helplessly as Robert escaped. She just wanted to have a premonition of his location but found that she couldn't find him. Moreover, when she drew a circle and used magic similar to space, it began to become obscure, as if something was holding her back. Does he also have a gem on his body? In the past, the Ancient One could reach any place on the earth in a blink of an eye if he wanted to, but now he has to go around the earth at least 10 times. In this situation, space magic was obscure after meeting Robert just now. A mage of Ancient One's level wanted to limit her except for the power of gem. She could not think of anything else. At Tony's house, Robert let out a long sigh of relief. When he went to touch the time stone, just now, it was completely impromptu and he didn't expect that he actually succeeded. You must know that Ancient One does not only use physical attacks like ordinary people. What really scares Robert is her magic. If he is not careful, the other party may notice his weakness, which is something he does not want to see. Mr. Robert, would you like some coffee or something? Jarvis's voice sounded from the side. Robert looked at it in surprise before confirming that it was safe. No, I'd better take a nap first. Robert was sleeping soundly in the middle of the night when he was woken up by Tony to fight the terrorists. After solving the problem, he went to the shield building nonstop to verify that Wells wanted to kill him. When he later made a big fuss in the White House, Robert was not too tired physically, but his spirit was a little tired. After saying hello to Jarvis and putting a USB flash drive on the table, he was finally able to sleep peacefully. Federal Special Prison. Those who can be imprisoned here are all extremely vicious, or only those with great power in society are qualified to be imprisoned here. Obadia, I really didn't expect that the person who wanted to kill me was actually you. Tony, I know I was wrong, please let me go, okay? Just for the sake of your father Howard. Obadia was already shackled by handcuffs and shackles, and it was difficult for him to move his body. However, after meeting Tony, he had to show a pitiful look even though he endured the pain of his flesh and skin. Tony. No, Obadia, you are smuggling arms. The president personally ordered your arrest. I can't save you. He always felt some compassion. After all, he has been with someone for so long. Is it possible to say he has no feelings? Then why are you here to watch my jokes? Ha ha ha, Howard, look at your son. He is just like you back then. Just as ruthless. Obadia first roared at Tony, and then shouted to the sky like crazy, looking like he was losing his mind. Why? Tony walked out of the prison slowly, looking back at this as it might be his last time. The moment he walked out of the door, he didn't feel so reluctant to leave. After all, that was a person who wanted to kill him. In the White House office, President Lytton and a group of senior officials discussed for a long time before finally deciding how to win over Robert. Lytton. It has been found that Wells is suspected of corruption, illegal detention, and abuse of power. A total of dozens of charges were listed, and finally President Lytton announced the decision. In view of the many crimes Wells has committed, it is now announced that he will be stripped of all his previous honors, and family members will not be allowed to participate in government and military work from now on. This is undoubtedly the announcement of the demise of the Wells family. If this decision were issued by the president alone, it may not be effective at all, and there may even be a risk of counterattack. But now that almost all the top figures and organizations in the United States have agreed to this order, the fate of the family behind Wells is already doomed. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.